तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय।
पंजाब विश्वविद्यालय तेरी शान और शौकत सदा रहे, मन में तेरा आदर मान और मोहब्बत सदा रहे। पंजाब विश्वविद्यालय तेरी शान और शौकत सदा रहे।
तू है अपना भविष्य विधाता, पंख बिना परवान सिखाता, जीवन पुस्तक रोज पढ़ाकर सही गलत की समझ बढ़ाता।
जीवन पुस्तक रोज पढ़ाकर सही गलत की समझ बढ़ाता।
तेरी जय गौ शंख बजाए,
रोशन तारे बन जाए,
बखरी तेरी शोहरत, तेरी शोहरत सदा सदा रहे।
विश्वविद्यालय तेरी शान और शौकत सदा रहे। पंजाब विश्वविद्यालय तेरी शान और शौकत सदा रहे।
तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय।
या कुंडेनु तुषार हार धवला, या शुभ्रवस्त्रावृता, या वीणावर दंड मंडित करा, या श्वेत पद्मासना, या ब्रह्माच्युत शंकरा प्रभृतिभिः देवै सदा वन्दिता, सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निशेष जाड्यापहा। शुक्लं ब्रह्म विचार सार परमा आद्यां जगद्व्यापिनीं वीणा पुस्तकधारिणीम् अभयदां जाड्यान्धकारापहम् हस्ते स्वाटिकमल्लिकां विदधतीं पद्मासने संस्थितां वन्दे तं परमेश्वरीं भगवतीं बुद्धिप्रदां शारदाम् बुद्धिप्रदां शारदाम्. Thank you. या कुण्डेनु तुषारहारधवला या शुभ्रवस्त्रावृता या वीणावरदण्डमण्डितकरा या श्वेतपद्मासना या ब्रह्माच्युतशङ्करा प्रभृतिभिः देवैः सदा वन्दिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निःशेषजाड्यापहा शुक्लं ब्रह्म विचार सार परमा आद्यां जगद्व्यापिनीं वीणा पुस्तकधारिणीम् अभयदाम् जाड्यान्धकारापहम् हस्ते स्वाटिकमल्लिकां विदधतीं पद्मासने संस्थितां वन्दे तं परमेश्वरीं भगवतीं बुद्धिप्रदां शारदाम् बुद्धिप्रदां शारदाम्. Thank you.
I request all the participants to keep their mic on the mute mode for 2 minutes so that we can just start off. Keep your mics on mute, please. All right. Omkaram bindu sanyuktam nityam dhyayanti yoginah kamadam mokshadam chaiva omkaraya namo namah. On the behalf of Department of Philosophy, I take this opportunity to welcome Professor R.C. Sinhaji, Chairman, Indian Council of Philosophical Research. Our speakers, Professor Beena Isaac, Director, Center of Philosophical Counseling, University of Kerala. Professor Ran Lahav from North Vermont University, USA. He'll be joining us shortly because there are the time gap, the times the span is different, so he'll be joining in an hour or so. Dr. Sushil Dubey, valedictory speaker, program officer, ICPR, we welcome you, sir. I also wish to greet all the participants whom we feel connected every time during these academic events. Even if we have not met, trust me, I have to submit that with your presence, we feel humbled and strengthened. I also wish to welcome our teachers who have shaped number of students and contribute to do so in all possible ways. Professor Geeta, we welcome you. It is also to submit that the Department of Philosophy, Panjab University, Chandigarh, in its study circle, Elenchus, under the sponsorship of ICPR, is now conducting second and third lecture on philosophical counseling or philosophical practice, as now we call it. Before this, we had organized a lecture by Professor Florine Koba from Switzerland, who spoke on experimental philosophy. This I am talking of the month of February, prior to COVID times. And we do believe that any academic event is an open-ended program intended to enrich us conceptually. Philosophical counseling has been comparatively a new addition to the family of philosophy, which has led academicians and thinkers to question the nature, concerns, and issues of the subject. Many of us have also been thinking, if at all, counseling, as in the case of psychology, would just be the same in philosophy. Questions pertaining to the characteristics and features of counseling in general and a student of philosophy, for a student of philosophy in particular, would it be same? Is philosophical counseling a self-talk, helping us to evolve ourselves? And if yes, what kind of tradition that we find in yoga would be? Would it be similar to philosophical counseling itself or not? And how about Sri Aurobindo when he talks of involution? So these are the questions which bother us as students of philosophy when we look at philosophical counseling as an emerging area. Be it Sankhya, Vaisheshik, or Buddhism, all philosophies believe that human life is entangled in suffering and miseries. And each philosophy has its own discourse to offer us. So, in this venture, our aim is to understand the presumptions of this new subject, to explore the element of goodness in the subject, to relate the subject by tracing it to our tradition and culture, to accept what the subject has to offer us, and to challenge the limitations. With these words, we look forward to the guidance of our seniors and experts by dwelling on the subject directly or indirectly. I now invite Professor R.C. Sinha to show us a new direction through his inaugural address of this webinar. Welcome you, sir.
So, first of all, I offer my namaskar to each and everyone, and I am thankful to Dr. Shivani Sharma for inviting me for this new venture. And naturally, she has talked about the philosophy study circle. Actually, ICPR has offered, rather, governing body has taken decision that wherever philosophy study circle is being conducted, ICPR will be at their doorstep. So, from through this platform, also, I rather offer that teachers of philosophy who are interested in just deliberating, conceptualizing, and discussing any problem of philosophy, they can either conduct a study philosophy, a study circle monthly or quarterly, whatever suits them. So naturally, I congratulate Dr. Shivani Sharma for acknowledging ICPR we have taken it legal in a legal way. We have taken a decision because governing body is the functional authority of the ICPR, which is certainly the highest body in the council. So I see some of the faces. I must extend my namaskar to Namita ji, Pratibha, whatever the name I remember, Sushim Dubey ji is uh, our colleague, and a few minutes back also we had a talk. So wherever there is a necessity, uh, we discuss the matter, and certainly I openly extend my invitation for conducting the philosophy study cycle, and especially to Namitaji because she is in the Mumbai University. Uh, so now let me come to the theme. So philosophizing is a one thing, and philosophical counseling is certainly a different. But as Dr. Shivani Sharma has expressed, that this is a new dash in the field of philosophy. So philosophical counseling is a new dash, especially in India. There are one or two centers, as I have been reported, and in Delhi University, uh, few months back, Dr. Balaganapati, he was also conducting some such type of not webinar at that time, seminar on philosophical uh, counseling. So philosophizing is certainly conceptualizing, as we know that philosophizing is concerned with the concepts, and certainly uh, uh, in Indian context, since she has mentioned that we have to uh, take this problem in the traditional or in the Indian context. So uh, I rather understand that in ancient time, philosophizing was taken by the rishis and maharishis. And rishi, the philosophy was not a classroom teaching. So certainly philosophical systems, heterodox systems and the orthodox systems, these two systems we classify Indian philosophy under two heads. This is for the textbook purpose, and for ordinary purpose, we classify Indian philosophy as heterodox systems and the orthodox systems. But one thing is very much clear, that our ancient saints and seers, they propounded Indian philosophy. Professors and teachers of university, they explain, they disseminate philosophical knowledge. But the original propounder, they are rishis. And certainly, uh, uh, even in uh, even we take the Charvak system, that has also been propounded by Rishi Acharya Brihaspati, and certainly uh, it was not in a classroom, but it was in the shape of counseling. Few of the students or few of the followers, they gathered uh, in the Gurukul systems. Our educational system was also not very formal. Uh, in the ancient period, and certainly uh, uh, philosophizing and philosophical counseling, they were going hand in hand in the ancient time. But uh, when rather when Britishers came, or in the medieval age also, uh, philosophy when Britishers came, our educational system changed, and in Indian universities, the syllabus of philosophy uh, is primarily dominated by the Western thought. I can mention when I was a student in Patna University long back, and at that time uh, there were 8 papers. 6 papers somehow or other pertaining to the Western philosophy, and 2 papers. Was the classical Indian philosophy, and the other, since the head of the department of Patna University was also a great saint, Professor D.M. Dutt. D.M. Dutt, Dhirendra Mohan Dutt, he was not a student of philosophy. He was a student of Sanskrit in the Guwahati University. But when he joined Patna University, he shaped the Department of Philosophy. But perhaps, I don't know, there was only 2 papers. One was of the contemporary Indian thought, and the other was of the classical Indian thought. So Western philosophy dominated, and even after getting freedom, the philosophizing certainly was uh, uh, very much related to the Western thought. So our rishis, they uh, philosophized philosophizing were very much interlinked with the counseling. But in the modern age, uh, this counseling uh, aspect of Indian philosophy was separated, and uh, now now very recently in India too, we have realized the importance of philosophical counseling. So there is a difference between philosophical counseling and the psychological counseling. Naturally, normally, counseling goes with the psychological counseling, or the philosophical counseling is not very popular. So, psychological counseling and philosophical counseling, they cannot be equated. Though psychology was a part and parcel of philosophy of late. When I was a student, psychology was also one of the papers in our undergraduate. So psychology, but the counseling, philosophical counseling and psychological counseling, they are not, uh, they cannot be equated. So philosophical counseling or the philosophical dialogue is different from the uh, psychological counseling. Psychological counseling is concerned with the emotive aspect or the emotional aspect, whereas philosophizing, uh, so to say, is not concerned with the emotive aspect, though emotion cannot be ruled out, because man is an integral being. Man, as uh, uh, Shivani ji mentioned the name of Sri Aurobindo, so I must explain the concept of man according to Sri Aurobindo, because philosophical counseling is concerned with the man and the life. the living man and the living situation. So Sri Aurobindo conceived that man is not only psychophysical being, man is uh, psychophysical come spiritual being. The spiritual aspect of man is very important in philosophy. Or naturally, philosophical counseling uh, differs from psychological counseling in the sense that philosophy uh, philosophy uh, rather hankers after logical consistency. So logical consistency and the moral standard and the spiritual longing. So man is not only so body, mind, and spirit. So naturally, man is integral being, and philosophizing is certainly it is a Western conception that philosophizing is uh, uh, a sort of linguistic analysis. Of late, in the 20th century, philosophizing was not very much concerned with the life and human existence. It was concerned with the clarification, and it was rather very much confined to logical consistency and the uh, analytic analysis of the language. So in the modern age, when science dominated the whole scene, technology dominated the entire globe, and so naturally philosophers, they were also longing for certainty, and logical analysis or the analysis of language, that was the core business of philosophy of late. But the situation has changed, and certainly in the postmodern age, when in the modern age we were longing for universalism, we were longing for rationalism. So rationalism, universalism, and structuralism. So philosophers also, they were concerned with these three aspects. Uh, they, in philosophy, they wanted some structure, and naturally, philosophy was considered to be the quest, rational quest, and philosophical statements are considered to be universal. But in the postmodern age, the paradigm has shifted, and naturally, relativism is prevailing. Philosophy, in the field of philosophy also, and especially when we talk about ethics, because philosophical counseling is not only considering the logical consistency, but it is also concerned with the ethical standards. So, what is right and what is wrong? So our behavior our behavior in society and the interpersonal uh, relationship, in this way, moral standards are also very much. Ethics is a very important subject of philosophy, and certainly if we talk about philosophical counseling, we have to think about the moral standards. We have to think about the right and wrong aspects of our activities, our social activities. So, in the postmodern age, relativism is prevailing, and philosophizing is not simply uh, structuralism or creating a system. So in the we talk about contemporary philosophy. In the contemporary age, philosophy philosophers are not system builders. Sri Aurobindo has not given a system Rather, he subscribed to the existing Vedantic system of philosophy. But Sri Aurobindo is a philosopher because he has rather interpreted Vedantic philosophy in the new way, and in contemporary Indian thoughts. Some of the philosophers, they charge that contemporary thinkers have not given anything new, but they are very much critical, and certainly if we talk about Sri Aurobindo, he is out and out uh, outstanding philosopher in the contemporary age. And he was also a rishi. So in India, philosophizing and counseling, my, my rather presumption is that they go hand in hand, they go together, and the appropriate name in the contemporary thought is Sri Aurobindo, who has propounded rather a, a new philosophy of, I can call it, and most of the thinkers they have called integral Advaitism. My teacher was in BHU. He has written a book on integral Advaitism of Sri Aurobindo. He was professor in BHU, Professor R.S. Mishra, and he was considered to be expert in Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. So naturally, my submission is that in India, philosophizing and counseling, they go hand in hand. With this submission, I thank Dr. Shivani Sharma. I thank all the participants and all my friends who have joined. Thank you very much, Shivani ji.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your kind words, sir. What we could gather from your address is that in a seed form, in a nutshell, that philosophization cannot be devoid of counseling. So the ethical standards, the moral implications that we use in our language, it comes automatically. It is rightly embedded in all our linguistic expressions also. So thank you for bringing up that philosophization is primarily conceptualization, but certainly you have given a track, the historical track. You have referred to Brihaspati and to the Charvan system, whereby education had a shift from the traditional discourse to a British standardization of syllabi. And of course, you differentiated between psychological counseling and philosophical counseling, and rightly said that emotive aspect of human existence dominates the psychological counseling. But yes, you are also right in saying that man is an integral being, and emotions cannot be devoided of man when we are talking of philosophical counseling. And certainly logical consistency, moral standards, and spiritual longings are the three foundational stones of human existence. We agree to it, sir. And certainly we will keep your message intact and keep it in mind that philosophization is in a way counseling. Now with this, I'm very thankful for your words, sir, for your guidance. Now I wish to introduce our main speaker, Professor Beena Isaac. She has been a director at the Center for Philosophical Counseling in the University of Kerala, and she has served in the Department of Philosophy in University of Kerala for 24 years. And her PhD thesis, her research work was on philosophy of Jiddu Krishnamurti, and she has produced number of PhDs, and of course she has written extensively, and she has 4 books to her credit and number 23 articles in different journals. And it is interesting to note that the papers she has written, she has referred to Yoga Sutras also. So I'm sure that Professor Beena, as I invite her, she will be contributing to the Indian tradition of the Yoga Sutras while referring to philosophical counseling. So we welcome you, ma'am, on the behalf of Department of Philosophy. We welcome you. It's an honor to have you here, and the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Shivani. Today I am very happy to know that Panjab University has conducted the first international webinar series on philosophical counseling. I congratulate Dr. Shivani Sharma for showing interest in counseling, counseling field of philosophy. Then a brief introduction to philosophical counseling. Philosophical counseling is an emerging field of mental health profession that has been dedicated to the enhancement of human development. The purpose of this study is to enable the people to have an awareness on philosophical methods and principles which have an unique experience in our day-to-day life. Philosophy consists of proper goals and theories to reflect on various pertinent issues of human beings. First of all, philosophy as an inquiry and reflection. Literally, philosophy means love of wisdom. Wisdom is like the flame of a candle which illumines itself. Everyone can attain knowledge, but only wise can attain wisdom. There is some difference between wise knowledge and wisdom. Accurately, it is defined as inquiry and reflection on human experience. The aim of philosophical inquiry is to gain insight into the questions about knowledge, truth, reason, reality, meaning, human mind, and values. All philosophical inquiry presupposes distinction between truth and falsehood, fact and fiction, or more generally speaking, between what is apparent and what is behind appearance, that's reality. Practical philosophy consists of some special features such as fact-finding, truth-seeking, and problem-solving, which are helpful to avoid our worst situations in our life and help to seek happiness. The significance of philosophical counseling is that it is an activity that people undertake when they speak to perceive fundamental truth about themselves and the world in which we live and their relationship to the fellow beings. Philosophy is considered to be a comprehensive system of ideas about human nature and the reality we live in. The mental problems emerge as a condition of subnormal mental development characterized mainly by our limited intelligence and social inadequacy. Philosophers inquired freely into all aspects of the world and humankind. They starting from the belief that human reason is competent on its own account to formulate the right questions and to seek answers to them concerning every matter of interest or importance to humanity. Next, counseling in philosophy. Philosophy is a way of life and understand the ultimate realities of human life in the course of living. Counseling in philosophy tends to focus on individuals and what goes on within and between them. Actually, philosophy helps to identify our own personal resources and capabilities, which are sometimes lost in times of confusion and anxiety. It is a process in which individuals have the opportunity to improve their pattern of thoughts, habits, and feelings when it may be problematic. Philosophers were concerned with the question of arguments and discussions, but were seeking to make it possible to create a different kind of society in which people could have the freedom to think for themselves. The ideas and concepts of philosophers emphasize on the capacity of the individual to achieve insight and to see the world with a new light. The philosophical mind can understand the truth of real problems and its solutions which lies in the problem itself. That is the core of the philosophical counseling. Thus, we are urgently in need of understanding philosophical truths which gives more positive meaning to our lives through the reasoning faculty and critical thinking. Then next, some principles of philosophical counseling is the self-discovery is the first step to learn and accepting oneself completely. Actually, we should discover our own being and study about the self. What is myself, my thoughts, my feelings and emotions, etc. Next one, rational reflection, used for understanding our responsibilities in the world and society. That reason as the emphasizes new method of reflection led to inquiries into the nature and the world. And then faculty of intuition, which helps to assimilate and to perceive the cosmos as a whole. Next one, everlasting wisdom is the prerequisite for the attainment of the highest welfare of humanity. Totality of wisdom in both the physical and mental realms are essential. All these are the principles behind the study of philosophical counseling. Then next one, Socratic method for counseling. Socrates was seen as the forerunner of the therapeutic philosophy. Socratic method of counseling designed to stimulate critical thinking. He engaged with the cooperative argumentative dialogue, asking and answering questions to draw out ideas and underlying presuppositions. Philosophical thoughts on every fundamental aspect in the world and human life are critical in its nature. For Socrates, systematic questioning of the claims made by others to knowledge and wisdom become a way of life. The ultimate wisdom comes from knowing oneself. So to him, unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates wanted everyone to start with self-examination. It may want you and me to carry out a thorough self-examination of what we thinking, speaking, and acting or doing. Is there any connection between these three? Our thoughts, speech, and action. Then you can examine your own self. Then through this process, you can use your own reasoning faculty, and if necessary, be critical in thinking also. It helps to improve our thinking capacity also. Then arguments must be supported through facts, reasoning and opinions, which creates new ideas. An argument actually in logic, it is a rational arrangement of premises and conclusions. Next, counseling ability. Counselor should listen and understand the other person's point of view and underlying motives without bias. Reply by using various methods of deductive logical reasoning, like use of effective analogies to rebut and showing the absurdity of a particular position. Then ability to reflect red herring fallacy and keep the discussion on point. The fallacy of red herring or changing the subject does not offer reasons to support its conclusion, but diverts attention to other issues that are irrelevant. Um, then avoid using appeal to authority fallacy for maintaining the presence of mind and affirming the good qualities of the other person. Appeal to the false authority depends on false statements. But the expertise authority depends on the reliable facts, and appeal to authentic and appropriate authority is not a fallacy. So avoid confrontation and do not get into futile argument over matters of opinion. Next, there is some in the Greek philosophy, Stoicism. The famous maxim advocated by Stoics is live according to nature. According to Stoics, the virtuous life was one lived in harmony with nature. It is so live according to the laws of the universe and of man's own essential nature, that is reason. Reason and restraint are means to avoid emotional suffering. In Vedic concept of Rita means a course of things, that is the universal law. There is then the virtuous life was one lived in harmony with nature. Nature endowed us with reason, and this is what made humanity special in comparison with other species. We are disturbed more by our reactions and expectations than by events themselves. Then willpower is needed to see beyond our basic instincts and develop self-discipline. Actually, willpower means the capacity to act righteously. Self-discipline is necessary for decision-making process also. Then there are some principles. Mastering desires means we should be masters of our desires. It is for there must be a control over our desires. Then thinking accurately, that is a proper way of thinking is necessary. Then last one, by performing duties, all these are essential for our personal well-being. Next, some comparison and some version of a Socratic method is connected to Vedantic reasoning. In our social life, the mental struggle is the feeling of insufficiency, inadequacy, and incompleteness. Philosophy of Vedanta can provide incredible solution for human problems because it includes another method for self-examination. A wise man is one who has corrected his perception. He knows that the body is not the self, body is only a means for the self to experience the world. Actually, the body is dying every minute. The mind is constantly changing. The reality about man is that it is man's character where the solution to problem lies. This realization is the essence of spirituality. Everyone has the divine nature in his being, so they are doing good actions. But the human nature is confused always, which is also in his being, and try to overcome the human aspect by the power of divine aspect in our being. We are incomplete, not adequate in most of our situations. Vedantic method used to realize the ultimate goal in the life through the practice of four ideals, realize the facts through the discrimination of real and unreal, maintain the emotional stability through controlling our desires, identify the truth through developing the power of concentration, be active through doing our duty with dedication. Next, appearance and reality, the human problems and the mental traumas may be sorted out through Vedantic reasoning. Advaita view of Advaita teaches that the appearance of the world is the product of, next slide, product of cosmic illusion or Maya, which is inexplicable. The veils of Maya exist and it bewilders the individual self who superimposes the non-self. Impelled by the ignorance, one example for that, Advaita view on rope snake illusion. The snake is false because it is contradicted by the subsequent knowledge that the object lying there is only a rope. Like this, our dreams are false because they are contradicted by knowledge of the waking states. Truth is knowledge which does not suffer contradiction by any subsequent knowledge. The relation between appearance and reality is described as Maya. Impelled by the ignorance, an individual lives in a mind-born world, forgets his real nature, plunges into false egoism. Right actions, control of mind, detachment from the worldly desires are prerequisites of attaining self-realization. Next, we have to develop our, we have to know what is the actual self-worth. Human self has the capacity to transcend into the higher spiritual level. We learn about our own self and understand ourselves. Then we can find out our hidden talents and the weaknesses. Good thoughts creates actually love, compassion, and tolerance, etc. Bad thoughts creates fear, anxiety, depression, etc. So we should value ourselves and keep it as our best. Do not compare with somebody else. We do not know who we really are. This is the confusion which creates anxiety. According to Vedanta, this confusion is due to mixing up of the real and the unreal. Our understanding of who we are is wrongly associated with who we are not. When we elevate ourselves to the higher level, then we will be able to value our own being. This is the foundation of actual self worth, and there is a gradation of awareness to bring self-respect. The central, then in counseling, next slide, counseling in Bhagavad-Gita. In most of the situations in our life, what is right and what is wrong is quite ambiguous. We are confused with what to be done and what is not to be done. Gita mentions the golden rule, do to others what you would like others to do to you. It says keeping yourself as the yardstick, seeing others as equal to you, consider what is pleasurable and painful to them. This is often a great way to discern right from the wrong. The central purpose of Gita philosophy is to solve the problem of life and stimulate right conduct. It is a system of speculation as well as role of life and intellectual search for truth. In Gita, Krishna advises Arjuna to remove the emotions and feelings and retain mental stability. We should live in the midst of the storm and the stress of social life. The narrow selfish impulses of sadness and doubts should be overcome by doing one's duty without any thought of recompense. Then, next slide. Therapeutic approaches to our present situation, COVID-19. Philosophy underpins therapy as a means to healing, identity, direction, and meaning. It forms the core of applied behavior analysis and thus forms the core of behavior modification. One way of giving positive reinforcement in behavior modification is in providing compliments, approval, encouragement, and affirmation. Philosophy is a reliable way of accessing this experience, and it is as appropriate for putting theory into practice. It is very hard to retain positive energy during this pandemic situation. Our body's immune system is yet to develop a new strategy to counter this novel mutant coronavirus. Actually, prevention is better than cure. It is the golden proverb we all have heard. The feeling of unity, amity, and love for each other is needed now to keep the pandemic away. This should be the therapy to throb of life, the wave of mind, and the line of action. There is a need for positive attitude at the time of fear and uncertainty. Next slide. Fear and uncertainty. Fear is a negative habit and uncertainty is a negative thought. Fear may be the reason for many people why they are found to be uninterested when people are discussing good ideas and good things. Then, if we think life is uncertain, it is as it is forever. Actually, uncertainty is there forever, for every moment of life. In any case, if we want to change our state of affairs and states of being, we need to change our habits and attitudes. We may need to introduce a new habit, change our negative thoughts, or improve upon our good habits. Good and bad habits are nothing but our accumulated habits. Then some other counseling thoughts are also mentioned. In Buddhism, we study about, next slide, study about the middle path, which is the path between eternality and nihilism. Buddhist philosophy says that nothing exists without any cause, nor does it perish without leaving some effect. They hold the middle view, avoiding the two extremes of eternity and nihilism. The middle path prescribes to avoid the extreme happiness and extreme suffering. Then already in our life, we have some opportunity to happiness and suffering. Actually, both suffering and happiness is part of our life, and then we can maintain an equilibrium between these two extremes and apply the values in life. This is actually said in the Buddhist philosophy. Then yoga philosophy can also see some philosophical methods. The essence of yogic practice is meditation, which involves stilling the mind to stop the normal emotional thoughts and helps us to achieve stability of mind. Then we can focus at any point. So we have to go through 3 stages like deciding what we want to achieve, centering the point, and reflect upon the results. Yoga philosophy can take care of our mental and physical health problems also. Then next one French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, in his first novel, Nausea, exemplified the causes of dread, anguish, and anxiety. Man is never free from his situations, though he is always free to manage or deny that situation and try to change it. The fundamental transcendence which illumines the world in its totality. Actually, Jean-Paul Sartre, the famous dictum is man is condemned to be free. He gives importance to freedom and responsibility, which is actually related each other. Then for one more modern thinker in India, Jiddu Krishnamurti. According to Jiddu Krishnamurti, truth is a pathless land. Actually, we have to find out the truth and reality in this world. There is no path to truth or reality. Then one more counseling aspect by Jiddu Krishnamurti. Every positive come out of negative. That we can examine through our own experiences. Some positive results are coming from the negative sides. When we face with the negative aspects, then we are trying to get into a positive aspect. Then I am concluding my paper. The most optimistic view of philosophy is to counsel humanity. It is no doubt. The application of philosophical methods and principles helps humans to understand themselves, the world, and life itself. The practical part of philosophy is no doubt deals with mental health therapy, and there is cogency for detailed account of philosophical counseling. Now, thank you for all listening patiently, and thanks to all the faculties in Panjab University, especially to Dr. Shivani Sharma. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your presentation and sharing your thoughts on philosophical counseling. We do understand the spirit behind your presentation. If I may just summarize all the views that you have suggested, that it is basically to create philosophical counseling is basically creating an awareness, and its aim is to gain insight into the questions of knowledge, truth, and reality. So, and you also mentioned that philosophical counseling is nothing but it is in itself is a way of life. It is an opportunity to improve one's own pattern of thoughts, habits, and feelings, not much different from what Aristotle has to suggest, you know, when he speaks of happiness and cultivation of habit in order to achieve that happiness. So self-discovery, certainly you said that it is like to accept oneself. Principles you discussed, principles of philosophical counseling, responsibilities in the world, and you have to perform, keep performing your duties that you have been given with, and of course, totality of vision, that's what you have to recommend, and of course, Socratic method that comes to us as a methodology to, as an enriching method, for philosophical counseling. And of course, ultimate wisdom, of course, comes only to, knowledge can be gained, but not wisdom by everyone. So you also mentioned about counseling abilities. Who is actually eligible to, counsel? What should be the qualities and ability in a person to counsel somebody? And you referred to certain fallacies that have to be avoided. And of course, then you moved on to the principles and to live according to nature. Stoics, you refer to the principles of Stoics, and avoid emotional suffering, to master desires, and to master one's thinking. And performing of duties have been your insistent submission, I would say, and to have a willpower to exercise it into and modulate into your self-discipline. And you refer to Vedantic system of reasoning. Insufficient, how do we feel insufficient and inadequate and incomplete, and what happens to us because of these limitations. And still you recommend again to be active on duty, one's own duty. And you have recommended the Vedantic solution to differentiate between the real and the unreal. You also mentioned about appearance and reality, and you also suggested to believe in one's self-worth. And you referred to Bhagavad-Gita while you were suggesting the methods available of methods of counseling available in our own tradition. We completely agree. And you also brought in the element of fear and uncertainty, and that gives anxiety, that builds up anxiety in an individual, and probably that is the reason why we seek counseling. You all went on to Buddhism and the philosophy, mentioned about Sartre. We completely understand, ma'am, all these points, but in the end, I have to submit that these are words, these are ideas. But how do we establish, because these are the ideas which have already been floated by the texts and thinkers and philosophers. Now when it comes to when it comes to an individual, how to bear the suffering, everyone is saying that suffering is the core. Human existence is bound by suffering and pain and misery. But when it comes to handling that suffering, that is bothering the human quest, the human mind. So certainly we have few questions for you, and I hope that you would like to address. We have Pradeep Ranjan Patnaik on YouTube. We have been followed by many of the participants. So he is given a question whether being subjective is a philosophical nightmare, as we are more often objective about ourselves and subjective about others. Because he's now giving an argument why we are objective about ourselves, because one can feel himself and herself and not others. So being objective, I think what he wishes to submit is that being objective is easier than being subjective in philosophy. Why? Because I can encounter my original self, my real self, more accurately, more authentically, because I know I can vouch for myself, my own experiences, than the experiences of others. It is completely philosophical. It has no scope. Being subjective in philosophy has no scope. Do you have anything to suggest to Dr. Pradeepta Ranjan Patnaik? Ma'am, am I audible to you? Could you listen to the question? Could you listen to the question, ma'am?
She's muted.
but she can hear it. She has to answer. Yeah. Ma'am, kindly unmute yourself. Ma'am, could you answer to the question?
Okay.
Would you like to ask the question?
Can you repeat the question?
The question is that if in philosophy it is possible for subjective, the being subjective in philosophy is a nightmare. Do you agree with this view? Why? Because being objective, I can be objective with regard to the mental states and my existence. But so
Okay.
far, subjectivity is concerned, it is a nightmare because I cannot be assured of what the other person is feeling. So how do you handle the problem of subjectivity and objective analysis of the state of the mind of the patient, or not the patient so called, but the person who has come up for a counseling? How do
Okay.
we get to know the objectivity, the objective, let's say, the objective, what to say? I mean, how do we get into the skin of the problem that the person who has come up to you for a counseling?
Okay. That is suffering is actually it is subjective. In Buddhist philosophy, we have some Four Noble Truths, and the life is full of suffering, but we have to find out the reason for the suffering. What is the reason for that particular suffering? And we have to objectively find out the reason, and then we find out the answer, and we have to remove the cause of the suffering, and we can seek the solution for that.
Okay.
Sometimes it is subjective in the way of getting suffering, and we are already go through the suffering, and we ourselves should find out the reason for the suffering, and we have to get out of it. That is why philosophical counseling says that solution lies in the problem itself.
So the probable question that he wishes to express is that subjective encounter is probably a tentative encounter. But when I know that I am suffering, I also know at the same time what is the cause of my suffering. What is the need for a counselor to tell me? Why can't I handle my own pain when I know it?
Okay.
The cause is known to me. I know why I am suffering. Then why can't the person, because he is more objective towards his own feelings. He has a first-hand experience of his own pain and suffering.
Okay.
So what is the need for, what is the guarantee that the person to whom we are approaching shall be having a similar evaluation of the problem as the person who's going for this counseling himself would have?
Okay. That life, actually human life is a mixture of suffering and happiness. We should understand that, and if there is some suffering, we know it can be overcome through the way of getting some happiness also. We have to find out. That's the remedy for that. In what they can, if you can specify one of the suffering, then I can kind of suffering.
Ma'am, this is a question probably, okay, we can take another question. How can we be functional in this world if we are detached from the world, and if we do not care enough, we do not do anything about it? I mean, the question precisely suggests that how can we how can we remain detached while being in the world? This
Being
is,
in the world.
yeah, being in the world and yet remaining detached with it. Is it
Okay.
possible? This is
Uh,
by Nidra. The question is by Yoga Nidra.
Actually, it is the being in the world means we are part of the world, and we have to face all the sufferings and this kind of fear or uncertainty, and other kinds of sufferings we have to face in this world itself. Therefore, it is two types of beings are also mentioned in existentialism: being in itself and for itself. Being in itself, that also thing in itself, because suffering is in itself. So the suffering is there. That's a reality. And that reality we must understand, it is a part of the life and world. In this world we have to we should face all the sufferings, and we can search for the reason, that is being for itself. It's sometimes it is going to outside, and it is external, and but we rightly we are suffering a lot by the uh, causes also, but we should, that is because being in itself and the importance same as being for itself. All these are in the existentialist philosophy. Heidegger is the exponent of being in. He suggests some measures for being in the world. Nothing that is mentioned by Heidegger in his philosophy. And there is also therapies included in our philosophical counseling. There is one of the counseling therapies, existential therapy. Then reality therapy is also there. Uh, all these therapies are applied in the included in the syllabus, and we are the part of the world, and uh, we are just we should face the um, good and bad in this world. So the suffering is also a part of our life, and like that, happiness is also a part of our life. Therefore, there is subject-object relationship is also there.
Okay. Right.
That world is like that. Life is as it comes and goes.
Right. Right, ma'am. We have another question for you, ma'am, by Dr. Pratibha Sharma from Miranda, Delhi. I would request her to ask her question.
Okay.
Unmute yourself. Pratibha, kindly unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you, Shivani, for that. And thank you, Dr. Beena, for your insightful lecture. I wanted to ask you that we are all human beings, and we are victims of so many cognitive biases. So, how to get over these cognitive biases in order to understand the other person's problem? Because we, as a part of society, are also victims of those cognitive biases. Because, say, for example, we have so many presuppositions. We see the things as they are given to us in the light of our own understanding. So, how to become totally objective and understand other person's problem. So this is my question. How can we become objective, in short?
It is because we live in this world. World is an objective being, objective thing, and in this world there is so much problems are there. We should face that it as it is, and that is the remedy for finding the solutions for that problem.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Beena.
Do we have any other questions? All right. Dr. Rajesh.
Rajesh.
Yeah, Varanasi. He has to ask. Yeah. Go ahead.
Can't audible.
Rajesh ji, you're not audible. Rajesh ji, kindly. Dr. Rajesh, I cannot hear you. Your voice is not clear. Your voice is not clear, Rajesh. No. Okay. Anyone else has a question? Okay. It seems he has a problem with his mic. So, all right. He has mentioned. Professor Sebastian, do you have a question too? Yeah, please.
I have a question. Thank you, Dr. Beena.
Little louder, sir. Little louder.
Yeah, after a long time I could meet you. I could see you. Well, my question is that you have been talking about counseling. Now, my question is that who needs the counseling?
Sir, louder. Sir, louder. Yeah.
So, I am asking you the question: who needs the philosophical counseling? See, when you talk about suffering, I think Shankara talks about three types of suffering. One is the cognitive suffering, another one is the cognitive suffering, and third one is the volitive suffering. My question is that the philosophical counselor, I mean,
Not here, sir.
pardon?
Not audible.
I don't know what happened. See. Hello? Am I
Hello.
audible?
Now you're audible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, my question is that when we talk about suffering, there are three kinds of suffering. One is the cognitive suffering, the second one is the cognitive, and third one is the volitive. So, a philosophical counselor needs to address to what kind of suffering, cognitive, or volitive. First question. The second question is something to do with the Sartre and all we're talking about. One is the being in itself, and another one is the being for itself. And being for itself is actually what? It is not what it is, but it is what it is not. In the sense that, it is the consciousness rather. Whereas the being in itself is that we are inert object. So, the consciousness actually suffers from its own inability to appropriate itself. That is the suffering there. So, could you please talk to me something about that? Thank you.
Ma'am, will you repeat the question, ma'am, Shivani?
Ma'am, the first question that I could understand was the difference between cognitive and affective suffering. But second
Okay.
question was pertaining, Professor Sebastian, if you could repeat your question little louder.
No, I am asking the question because there are three kinds of suffering. One is the cognitive suffering, number two, cognitive suffering, third one is the volitive suffering. Now, a counselor, a philosophical counselor, needs to address to what kind of sufferer. I mean to say, is it cognition, or the cognition, or the so-called volition? That's my first question. Did you understand the question? See, just as Professor Zirga was talking about earlier, that there is, there's a difference between philosophical counseling and psychological counseling. A psychological counseling, of course, needs to be with the what is so-called emotive, or we can say emotions. No?
Emotive.
But
Okay.
I think the philosopher need not be bothering about emotions rather. He had to do something to do with what is the cognition, the cognitive dimension. So are you talking about? So is that no? Can it work? I mean, seriously and what to say? I mean, unhesitatingly talk about cognitive and volitive rather than what to say the cognitive. Therefore, philosopher needs to be bothering about the cognitive suffering rather than the cognitive and the volitive. That's
Right. Professor Sebastian is submitting that the philosopher or a student of philosophy must address the cognitive suffering only, not the emotive sufferings. That is what he wishes to submit. That philosophical counseling, we must address the cognitive suffering only, not the emotive. That is done by already, psychological counselors. So that is probably what he wishes to submit. Do you agree, Professor Beena? Kindly unmute yourself, Professor Beena.
Okay. So I agree with the Shivani that cognitive is different from that. I didn't get
Emotive.
Dr. Sebastian. Actually, it is not clear.
I am clear about what I said. I am clear about what I said. I was saying that there are three kinds of suffering. One is the cognitive, number two is the cognitive, and number three is the volitive. So a philosopher.
Third one, sir. Third one.
Volitive,
Will. Cognitive.
Okay.
Cognition, and the volition. Okay. Now I am saying that a philosopher or philosophical counselor needs to bother about not cognition and volition, but rather about cognition. That's it.
Okay.
Actually,
I think he's right in saying so, that philosophical counseling should be addressing towards issues pertaining to knowledge. You also in the beginning of your presentation stated that philosophical counseling is an awareness about reality, truth, and knowledge. So these are issues which are not emotive in nature.
yeah.
Right? So, of course, philosophical counseling should be an address towards it. It should address issues pertaining to knowledge, truth, and if so, then they are cognitive in nature, not emotive in nature.
Cognitive or emotional?
Yeah.
Only emotional sufferings, we have to maintain and stability to our emotions by ourselves. We can. In Bhagavad-Gita, there is emotional stability created by Krishna to do his duty, to do the duty of Arjuna. And cognitive suffering. Am I correct? Cognitive suffering that is related to something related to the process of our brain. I think we can go through it. What is the cognitive basis? It is actually it is a brain process, how we take the suffering as a real or unreal. Emotions we can already know, it is ourselves, internal. But cognitive is actually, it is related to some neurotic problem, I think. So it needs a psychological counseling also.
All right. Ma'am, there is a question by our student Satvant. She wishes to know when someone is in moral dilemma, like especially with regard to the concept of justice, truth, etc., then how effective is philosophical counseling in helping that individual to understand and practice it?
That is why I am using reasoning faculty and critical thinking. Actually, critical thinking is the ability to think reflectively and independently to make decisions. So critical thinking is important in philosophical counseling. And like that, we have to use our rational faculty also. Then we can get the answer for that.
All right. All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here, ma'am. And we will formally thank you in a while. We have our next speaker with us, Professor Ran. If I could just see you, can you switch on your video?
I believe that my video is on, isn't it?
Oh, yes. So good to see you. So good to see you. Good morning for you and good evening for us. So we, Professor Ran, just a second. I'm just, okay. So let me formally introduce you, Professor Ran. He is an MA in psychology and did PhD in philosophy from University of Michigan. And more than 2 decades, he's been into philosophical counseling, now called philosophical practice. He's associated with North Vermont University, USA, and currently he's extensively writing, working on philosophical counseling. He has written books and articles, especially stepping out of Plato's cave. It seems that it has been receiving much laurels, and he has written extensively on philosophical counseling, and his work have been translated to, I was surprised to see, into Korean language and Hebrew. And I'm sure, sir, you must be knowing Hebrew yourself too. And he is exploring philosophical practice in terms of deep philosophy, which interests us even more. And an article by you, I was going through it, to use analytical philosophy in philosophical counseling. That seems very, very interesting. How to use this linguistic rules. We all know that all philosophical counseling or counseling in general comes to us only through words. But how do we get to, adjust to that pain and suffering that human beings, they go through? How this counseling can actually make that pain and suffering little mellower, or slow down, or little, can it mellow down itself or not? These are the questions, Professor Ran, that bother us as students of philosophy, as teachers of philosophy, when a new subject like this comes up at the doorstep of philosophy. So how do we address to this subject? In what direction? What is the blueprint? What is the ray of hope that we can actually draw for our upcoming generations in this subject? So we are very hopeful that you being here, Professor Beena being here with us, we will be enriched conceptually with regard to the issues. So we welcome you for your presentation, Professor Ran.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to talk with Indian people. I was in India many years ago. I was there 3 weeks, and I remember my experience. I thought 3 weeks is not enough, because India is not a different country. It's a different world, rich with culture and traditions and philosophies. I hope in the future, one day, I'll come for a longer period of time. And thank you, Professor Shivani, for inviting me to speak. What I would like to do today is to present not so much my own approach, but rather a general picture of philosophical practice or the philosophical practice movement as I see it. If anybody is interested in my own work, maybe in a future meeting, or you can look at my books. As Professor Shivani mentioned, Stepping Out of Plato's Cave is my main book on philosophical counseling. But my interest today is to describe the general picture of philosophical practice or philosophical counseling in this little world, the small world of those people around the world who are interested in the topic. And I would like to present the topic mainly from a historical perspective. You know, philosophical practice was born in the West about a little less than 40 years ago, and I joined it a little less than 30 years ago, something like 28 years ago. And so at that time, there were two tiny groups, one in Germany and one in Holland, that they were just struggling to understand what they were doing. And when I came, I joined the efforts, and I tried to expand the field to a larger dialogue, and I envisioned and I organized the first international conference, and I taught the first university course on the topic. So I was involved in the development of this field. And I would like to share with you this experience of this growth of this field. But also from another perspective, I think that the historical perspective is valuable because it shows us why we are where we are now and what alternatives on the road we could have taken and we didn't take, and what the possibilities are today and what the challenges are today. Okay, so I will present mainly a general landscape from a historical perspective of the past 38 years or so, where in the past 28 or so, I was actually very much involved. But before we start with a historical perspective, I would like to ask the general question, and this is, what is philosophical practice general or philosophical counsel general? And maybe for some of you it's a repetition, but that's okay. So what is philosophical practice and philosophical counseling? You notice that I'm using two concepts. Philosophical practice is used as the big concept, as the big field, and philosophical counseling is one big branch inside practice, and I will explain later in what sense. So from one perspective, philosophical practice is based on a vision. It's an endeavor, a philosophical endeavor. And the basic vision that everyone who is involved in philosophical practice or counseling shares is the vision that philosophy can be made relevant to ordinary people. It does not have to belong only to university classes, only to lectures in university halls, only to big, thick books that are very sophisticated that nobody can understand other than philosophy professors. Philosophy can be made relevant to ordinary people, to John the bus driver, to Mary the hairdresser. But notice that I say can be made, because it is not in its current state appropriate for the person in the street. In the current state, it's academic. Of course, academic philosophy is wonderful. I'm myself an academic philosopher, there is no problem. But if we want to make it relevant to people in the street, to ordinary people, then we must adopt it. We must change it. We must do something to make it helpful to ordinary human beings so that it would help them to live a fuller life or a richer life or a happier life or whatever, how you define it. So that is the basic vision of philosophical practice that started almost 40 years ago. And of course, historically, we can find it before this. But what does it mean, practically speaking? Well, practically, organizationally, it means that the philosopher who is the philosophical practitioner encounters individuals or groups from the general public and gives certain kinds of activity. Now, throughout the years, there were several different kinds of activities, or we can call them formats of activities, that developed. And one of them is philosophical counseling, but it's not the only one. A very common form of philosophical practice is the philo café. Philo café, philosophical café, is a philosopher, or sometimes more than one, who gives to the general population, usually once a week, conversations about important questions. For example, what is love? And next week they can talk about justice and so on. Now, this is really a discussion. So it's a wonderful format, but it doesn't really answer the real challenge of how to touch the individual and how to change their life. And it's nice to have philosophical conversations once a week, but it doesn't really answer the question of how to make philosophy relevant to everyday life, not just to lectures, but to everyday life. Another format that is a bit less popular, but it also exists, actually was adopted from another context, is called the Socratic dialogue. Socratic dialogue is a much more organized discussion, step by step, and the goal is not just to discuss issues, but also to teach the general public how to think about issues. So it's a very structured way, and it says, okay, now we go to the next step, and now to the next step, and so on. That is still a discussion about life. It doesn't touch life fully. And we, in philosophical practice, want to touch life more directly, more fully. Because if you look at philosophy, and I'm talking here mainly about Western philosophy, not because it's better than Chinese philosophy or Indian philosophy, but because that's the context in which philosophical practice emerged. It's 2,600 years of wisdom. It's a wisdom tradition, a very creative tradition of many voices. The greatest mind of the Western world helped to create it. So there is a huge treasury there, treasures of wisdom. Why not use those treasures of wisdom to the individual, to the ordinary person who wants to live life more fully or happily or deeply? So for this reason, the first two formats I mentioned are okay, nothing wrong with them, but they don't really address the main question, which is how to make philosophy, the philosophical treasures of the past, relevant to the person in the street. And so we get now to the third format, and this is a format that began already from the beginning, from the birth of philosophical practice, and this is philosophical counseling. Now, philosophical counseling, unlike the other two that I mentioned, is not a group activity, it's a one-on-one activity. So we have a counselor, a philosopher, right? I want somebody with a philosophical background who speaks with a client who comes usually every week, once a week, usually for about an hour, more or less, but of course it depends on your own preferences. And the important thing is that they talk about the concerns, the problems, the issues that the person, the client, experiences. So it's obvious that this is really a copy of psychotherapy. This is exactly the same format. Hopefully, the philosopher can use a philosophical conversation as opposed to psychological conversation. But this is a big issue. It's not so easy to say what exactly is philosophical as opposed to psychological. You know, as Professor Shivani said, I have 1 foot in psychology, 1 foot in philosophy. My PhD is in philosophy, my only MA in psychology, but actually many of the courses that I teach at university are psychology courses. And for me, the boundary is not so clear, and we will have to talk about it a bit later today. But anyway, this is another format then, one-on-one, where the topic is the life and the life issues of the person or problems of the person. And just like psychotherapy, they meet every week and so on. But let me mention two other two other formats of activity that I personally was very much involved. Personally, I started in philosophical counseling. I worked for many, many years as a philosophical counselor. But in the past, especially 15 years, I was a little bit disillusioned, and I will explain why later. And I went to group activity that is directed not for solving personal problems. For that, they can go to a psychologist, but for elevating life, for enriching life, for self-reflection, self-understanding, in that direction. And these two formats, I was involved in both of them. One is, we can call it the self-reflection groups. And these are small groups that are not open like Philo Cafe. You know, you can come if you want, don't come next week. No, these are specific groups that meet, let's say, for 4 or 6 times, or for a weekend. And they often read short philosophical texts, or at least are presented with philosophical ideas. So obviously the philosophical connection is obvious, it's not psychology. And using those philosophical ideas and texts, they look at themselves, share experiences, reflect on what it means to them. Of course, the texts are never authorities to follow, they're just seeds for contemplation. And for example, a meeting can be about love. And in this sharing, this togetherness makes it powerful and deep, both sharing philosophy and thinking. That's the self-reflection format. Let me mention the last one, which is what I'm currently involved, and I've been developing it for the past about 15 years, more or less, but really in the strong way about 6 or 7 years. And you know, it's always much simpler to take another format like psychotherapy and adopt it to us. That's the easy way. But to invent a new format of activity, which is, I think, what philosophy calls, is always very difficult. It takes many years to organize it. And this is what I've been involved in together with my group. We call it Deep Philosophy. But it is really contemplative kind of philosophy, and you in India should be very much aware of it. There are ancient traditions of text contemplation, which means relating to philosophical ideas, not from here, not from our intellect, from our analysis, nothing wrong with analysis, but we want to relate from our inner depth. That's why we call it deep philosophy, from our inner depth. And so there are ways of contemplating, thinking from our inner depth about the philosophical ideas, which are really basic life issues, and doing it in togetherness in those groups. The togetherness is very strong. We resonate like a symphony. It's very enriching, this togetherness. Okay, so that's the direction I'm working on. That's deep philosophy. If you're interested, there is a website. I have a website of deep philosophy, dphilo. And there are also some books on Amazon, among my books, about this topic. And as I said, I will not focus too much on it, because today I would like to present the big picture of philosophical practice. But let me summarize then that there are several different formats of activities through which the philosopher tries to address the task, the challenge. Oh yes, philosopher, you want to make your philosophy relevant to the individual? How are you going to do it? Okay, so we have the Philo Cafe. Well, it's still a discussion. We have the Socratic dialogue. Okay, it's not bad to learn how to think, but it still doesn't answer the real challenge. We have the philosophical counseling, which has the task of explaining how it is different from just ordinary psychology, especially given that there are schools in psychology, such as cognitive psychology or cognitive psychotherapy and humanistic psychotherapy, which seem very similar to what philosophical counselors are doing. We have the self-reflection groups. We have the deep philosophy groups, the contemplative groups, and there are also some smaller things such as philosophical journeys. Some people take people on a walk and so on. Okay, so all this is the general picture from the perspective of the vision. But we can also look at philosophical practice including philosophical counseling, from the direction of the movement, the people. We can say that philosophical practice from this perspective is a movement that started at the beginning of the 1980s and that involves people now in some small groups, mainly in Europe, recently in Latin America, and individuals in other countries such as the United States here and there. I have several people from India in my groups, here and there, Korea, and so on. So this is a network of people who are devoted to doing philosophical practice. Very often, the main branch is philosophical counseling, but not only. We in Deep Philosophy are also international, and we have our own activity with people from all over the world. And Philo Cafe is also a popular activity in almost everywhere that you have philosophical practice. Now, the important thing to realize about this network of people that I will describe historically how it developed, and this is important to understand. One is these are very few people. I call it a movement. We're not talking about 20,000 people. It's not psychology. It's really several hundreds of people. Of course, it's difficult to decide who is in and who is out. It's always difficult to count. What about this guy who was with us last year, but now he's only on the mailing list? Is he part of us or not part of us? You know, so it's hard to count. But basically, there are several hundreds of people, not more. The second thing to realize is that there is no general authority, no general institution that determines what is philosophical practice. What are the principles that everyone should abide by? What are even the ethical guidelines? Are you allowed to have a romantic affair with your counselee? There is no institution, no place that tells all philosophical practitioners or counselors what is right and what is wrong. Nobody tells you who can be a philosophical practitioner. Do you have to have a BA in psychology, an MA in philosophy, and MA in philosophy? There is nowhere. There is no central authority, in short. And this is product of how philosophical practice developed. Now, this is very important to understand. I mean, it's very important to see the implications of this. It means that if you enter the field, there is no authority to tell you what you can do. And it also means that if you look at the people who declare, oh, I am a philosophical counselor, it can be anybody. It can be somebody who understands nothing at all, who just declares himself to be. Or it can be someone who was 30 years in the field and wrote books and investigated. You cannot, just by finding somebody doing it, it doesn't tell you how deep or superficial he or she is, how much philosophy he or she is. This is radically different from psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis, there is one association, one organization, and it tells you the rules. Okay, and you have to go a certain training in order to be a psychoanalyst. In philosophical practice, it's not. It's just Wild West. Anyone can do what they want to do. Sometimes, you can say it's like philosophical practice is like a toothbrush. Everyone has his own. Everyone uses only his own. Right? Everyone can do what they want. This also has implications about philosophy programs. In the past 10, 15 years, there has been a surge of, well, not a huge surge, but some universities open programs, not just courses, but programs of philosophical counseling, usually. Not philosophical practice, usually philosophical counseling. But it's important to realize that the main motivation, not the only, not everybody, but a major motivation was just to attract students, to offer them, hey, you can get a job if you come to us. And often the teachers have no idea about philosophical practice. They just invent it. So here are people who for 40 years work on it, and here is someone, oh, I will invent it. Of course, you cannot hire 30 new people to teach the field. So usually those are people who don't understand. At the same time, there are also some wonderful programs of philosophy, like the University of Vienna in Austria offers a wonderful program of philosophical counseling. So you have this mishmash in the field of great programs and bad programs, deep individuals who don't know what they're talking about. And this might seem to you frustrating. And in some sense, it is frustrating. But in another sense, it's also a wonderful situation, because it means that there is a lot of room for creativity. If you enter psychoanalysis, well, you already have a theory and a framework, and you can work within the field. In philosophical practice, the field is yours. You can invent new things. Okay? Of course, it would be silly to invent the field without looking at what other people did. I mean, you have to read what they did. Hopefully you will come to the international conference. There is one thing that is common to all the groups, and this is an international conference which I envisioned and organized. Actually, I was the co-organizer in 1994. And this happens every 2 years. It's a good idea. Not many people are there, usually 120 or 40 people, but you will meet the major players in the field. Okay? So if you want to enter the field, then it's a wonderful opportunity for creativity. But we have to be serious. We have to look at what other people did, to read what they did, to understand what is going on, and to decide for ourselves what is our direction and what is deep for us. There are wonderful people there. That's another result of this unstructured structure of the field, that there are people there that are creative, that are passionate. Who else would go to such an unorganized place that doesn't offer a profession? Let me tell you, very, very, very few people in the world make a living on philosophical counseling. Very few people. So who else would be in such a place if not someone who is really passionate and creative? Of course, there are rivalries. That always happens between creative people. But there's a lot of creativity, a lot of passion, and it's a wonderful field precisely because it's not organized. You know, of course, specific organizations can have rules. What is the rule of training? Who can be trained, and so on. But if you don't like it, like in Italy, there are several such associations. You don't like that, you go to another association. Nothing binds you. They're just, or you can do it by yourself. Okay. So this is the field. It's a wonderful place for creative, passionate people. If you're looking for an organized theory, well, go to another field. Here you'll find many theories, many approaches. Okay, so I gave the general introduction about philosophical practice and philosophical counseling, both as a vision and as a movement, as a group of people. And as I said, I was active in this group for many years, and I invite anyone who is interested to really explore the field and find your own voice. And it's a process. Don't jump like many people do. Oh, I have my own idea. Let's not invent the wheel from the beginning. But after you learn what is happening, be creative and invent your own view. And especially in India, these things develop mainly in the West. There is no reason why in India there wouldn't be new voices, new wonderful voices with your own tradition. Of course, humans are humans. There are commonalities, but you have your own voice. I think it's a wonderful thing to try to develop it in India, not just to copy what some guru comes and tells you about philosophical practice, but to really look at what is happening. Sometimes not a famous person is a deep philosophical practice, and sometimes those who are vocal, who have the power to, are not very interesting. So really be open-minded. Check the different books, different people. Come to the international conference. This year it was supposed to be in Russia. but because of the pandemic, it was only an electronic one, an online one. Communicate with people. People are passionate. They like to communicate. Now let us look from another perspective, and this is the historical perspective. How did the thing develop? I think that this is important to realize where we are, to understand the field. Okay, because it is so unorganized, it's important to see how it develops. So philosophical practice, in a broad sense, was always around. I mean, there were always individual philosophers who talked with their friends, who talked with others, who helped them. This is nothing new. In ancient Western philosophy, there were schools of philosophy that had their own doctrines about how should live. You have this in ancient philosophy, most of the philosophical schools were directed to life. But they were not exactly for us because they had their own doctrine about what is life, their own analysis about what emotion is, their own analysis of what is the good life, and so on, and they imposed it on their followers. That's not our way. For us in philosophical practice, we want a philosophical journey. We want to philosophize. We don't want to receive a ready-made philosophy about what is right and what is wrong and who we are. We want to philosophize with our clients or with our group. Okay. So even that was not new. Okay, there were always people who did it, who helped their cousin, I don't know what, about their life from a philosophical perspective. But as a titled activity, here is philosophical practice. It began in the early 1980s, in 1982. That was when the German Association of Philosophische Praxis, which is philosophical practice in English, was formed in Germany. It was a tiny group, mainly by one person. Perhaps you heard the person Gerd Achenbach. He was the doctor of philosophy who started it. And several months afterwards, several university students, master students in Holland, in nearby Holland, at the University of Amsterdam, were also looking for some practical things to do with philosophy. And they heard about Achenbach. Achenbach lived right next to the border. So they went and talked with Achenbach. If you know Achenbach, Achenbach is very group-oriented. He's not interested very much in beyond. And so he was involved in his group, and he told those Dutch students, you go do your own. He was nice, but do whatever you want. The Dutch people then had to invent it from the beginning. A few months after Achenbach started with his group. Now, you may think that this is history. It's not interesting. I was not yet in the field. I came to the field 10 years later. But you may think, oh, it's history. But it's not just history. Those two groups gave the two of the main directions of what philosophical practice is today. Okay? That's the nature of human activity. If you start, there is a momentum. And people then learn from them and continue. And often we miss possibilities. We miss possibilities because the beginners, the pioneers went in that direction, so we follow that direction. And that's what happened to me. I followed them, and it took me years to realize that, in my view, that's not the right direction. But I have to step back, and what were those two groups? That, as I said, for 10 years, they worked among themselves, more centralized in Germany, more democratic in Holland, but very small groups. There was hardly anybody outside those two little groups in the world for 10 years who even knew that it was happening. So remember, the big challenge of philosophical practice is philosophy as we know it in the West is very abstract and general. Okay. But if we want to talk with the individual, we have to somehow change philosophy and make it relevant to the individual. Okay? Because the issues in philosophy are what is the essence of life, the meaning of life, what is the essence of love. Our John, the bus driver, is not interested in those questions. He has a problem, marriage problem with his wife. He is looking for somebody to love. He is not interested about the question of what is the essence of love. Okay, and Mary, our hairdresser, is not interested about the meaning of life. She just wonders what the career she would choose. Okay, so this is the question. This is the big challenge of philosophical practice, that every approach is an answer to. The answer of the German group was this. I mean, they didn't put it this way, but that is my restatement of what they did. What is the essence of philosophy? They asked, or Achenbach asked. The essence of philosophy is open, or more accurately, of philosophizing. Remember, we are not interested in applying ready-made philosophies. We are interested in philosophizing, thinking together with the counseling. So what is the essence of philosophy, says Achenbach? The essence of philosophy is open conversations. No assumption is taken for granted. Nothing is taken for granted. Anything is open. There is no method that is taken for granted. Just open conversation. A philosophical investigation is an open conversation. The other group, which was the Dutch group, which started, as I said, a few months ago, but not related to Achenbach, although the inspiration to do it came from Achenbach, but that was the end of the story. They went in another direction. And they said to themselves, what is the essence of philosophy? Right? That's the beginning of any approach to philosophical practice. You ask, what is philosophy? Let us now apply it to normal human beings. And they said, the essence of philosophy is critical thinking. To analyze, to uncover hidden assumptions, to see arguments, which one is a good argument or which are not. It's critical thinking, or if you want, logical thinking. So let us then do philosophical practice that will simply use critical thinking. So if somebody comes with a question of which career should I use, or how can I get along with my wife who is always, or with my husband who always complains about the way I cook, okay? Then critical thinking, let's see the issue, let's divide it, let's analyze it. You have a hidden assumption there, and come with an answer. Okay, that's the critical thinking approach, or the logical approach, the analytic approach. So we have two approaches that exist today and that started from those two people. It's important to see these were not a Freud that came and created. These were people like you and me who just struggled, and they came up with some philosophy students in Amsterdam who came up with this idea. And because of momentum, it stayed with us. Notice, by the way, a big decision that both of them did. And this is, both of them decided on the format of counseling. Both of them decided that philosophy, if you want to apply to life, you have to use in the counseling format, not as a group of self-development, not to appeal to people who are seekers and look for meaning of life. There are millions and millions of people who are seekers, who feel that life is okay. They don't have any special problem with their wife or husband, or it's just that life is, they want more in their life. There are millions of people. If I go to a bookstore in the United States, entire walls are about self-transformation, self-development. And yet, both the Germans and the Dutch did not try to appeal to them with philosophy, but try to appeal to people with problems who ordinarily go to psychologists. That was a big decision. That was without thought, I think. For me, it was also a big mistake. At least consider other possibilities. It was a mistake, I think, to decide that we and psychologists should go in the same on the same audience, and that it immediately put philosophical counselors in competition with psychologists, which is really no competition. It's psychology is a huge multi-billion structure. So what are you going to fight the psychologists? They have laws in their favor and so on. But also because of the content of philosophy. Let me explain what I think. And if you disagree with me, that's perfectly fine. I don't, I'm just trying to present my own view. Consider first view, the German view, that is still central in the German-speaking association. It's a relatively large association of maybe 100 or 150 people. It's not just Germany, it also includes Austria and Switzerland and anyone who can speak German. In Holland there also. And the main assumption is that philosophy is about talking without assumptions, without methods, just open talking. Now, I want to ask you, anyone who knows some philosophy, is this really philosophy? Look at Nietzsche and Plato, look at Aristotle, at the great minds of the history of philosophy. Is this what they did? They just chatted without assumptions? I would like to think they did much more than chatting without assumption. Not only this, every philosopher I know had some method, right? Had assumptions. What philosophers do throughout the history of philosophy, they construct palaces of ideas. That's what philosophy is about. Philosophy addresses basic life issues, not what your wife did yesterday. That's not the issue of philosophy. Look at 2,600 years of philosophy. They don't deal with your individual problems. That's philosophy. Philosophy deals with basic life issues. And it answers those life issues by constructing networks or palaces of ideas, theories. Every single philosopher, at least they try to. Even Socrates, who says that he doesn't know, tries to answer those issues with theories. So for me to say that philosophy is about talking without assumption, it's thin. That's what I do with my barber, with my hairdresser. It's not what I do as a philosopher. Now, I'm not saying that this is stupid. I'm saying there is a good element there, but philosophy is more than that. It cannot be only that. Philosophy is more than just talking openly. But this determined much of the German direction. And the German group, a relatively large group, very close. They hardly appear on the international scene. I know them personally. I participate in several activities. I often go to their activities. I don't speak German, but I have many good friends, and they're wonderful people there. And again, I think that there is a lot of creativity, a lot of nice things going on. But the idea that philosophy is just open dialogue, that's an element of philosophy. It's not all there is to philosophy. We need to enrich it, I think. It's not enough. The other direction I want to also criticize it, and this is my perspective. I'm sure that you will find others that will support it. And this is the idea that philosophical practice is a legal endeavor. Now, I think that if you look at the history of philosophy, you see, first of all, there are many philosophers who are not logical, they are non-rational, who go with intuition, go with contemplation, who go with self-reflection, and so on. There are many of those. But again, let's say that many philosophers did use logic. But is that all there is to philosophy? Really, is Nietzsche, is that what he did? Logic? Is Plato, is that what he did? Logic? I mean, philosophy is constructing worldviews, constructing theories, constructing visions of the world. Of course, critical thinking is an important component, and this is a contribution of this direction. But philosophy is more than that. And also, to both of those, I want to say, philosophy always is a dialogue with previous philosophers. It's a discourse of 2,600 years. You don't just get up in the morning and invent philosophy. So I would like to see a philosophy that has critical thinking, yes, has open dialogue, yes, but has more than that, has a construction of a worldview, has a dialogue with previous great thinkers. That, I think, would be a wonderful kind of philosophical practice. But because of a momentum, historical momentum, we ended up with philosophical practice, one that addresses mainly the audience of people who would normally go to psychologists, as opposed to people who, let's say, seek, who want to make their life fuller, who want to elevate themselves, to enrich themselves, okay? So we follow, the philosophical practice world follows to a large extent this decision that was made in 1982 or 3, and I'm not sure it's a good decision. And we follow this, I think, impoverished conception of what philosophy is, that philosophy is just chatting without any assumption with your counselee, or that it is analyzing. And I would like to see, and I hope that you Indians who come from such a rich tradition of wisdom, I mean, where else would you find a tradition of wisdom? And this is one of the greatest traditions of wisdom. Would appreciate that if you want to do a philosophy is more, philosophy is enriching, it's big. I mean, I'm sure that people in India, it's deep, it's big. I'm so sure that people in India appreciate it. So let me just mention the third approach, okay, which is where I am. Naturally, I present it all in favor of my approach. And I encourage you to look at also at philosophical practitioners who come from other approaches. You should hear their voice too. I mean, I am just one perspective. So for me, what happened to me is I joined about 10 years after the beginning of philosophy in 1992. And it began in 1982 and I joined. There were just two small groups that they worked within themselves. They didn't do much impact. For me, that already a sign that something is not directed at the right audience. And so I learned from them, and both of the groups were very nice to me, very inviting. And I started to practice, and the article that Professor Shivani mentioned about analytic philosophy, this is behind me. It's no longer me, okay? This is the past, I throw it behind my back, okay? But this was a time that I was doing critical thinking, and so I followed them for 2 or 3 years, and very soon I realized that's not what I want to do. Philosophy must be richer, and I don't want just to talk about the problem with their husband or wife. I had many counselees. At first I started with volunteers. I learned, then I became, but I thought that it would be a good idea to create an international dialogue to bring more people into the field. And so I envisioned the international conference, and we did it. I found somebody, Lumerinov, if you know his name, who helped me. At first, universities did not want to answer to host a conference on a topic that was unknown. But then I found Lumerinov, and from Canada, he was a junior, and he said, "Why don't we talk with the boss, and we'll see." I came there. We talked with the boss. We convinced the boss to hold an international conference there, and that was the first international conference. Every 2 years there are, since then until now. I also started teaching at Haifa University in Israel. I would, one semester a year, I would go there, a course in philosophical counseling. This was the first course in the world. I published and so on, and little by little things were moving. I was not the only one who moved it, but little by little it expanded. And very interesting that this same direction remained. First of all, the direction of addressing people with problems, as opposed to people who are seekers. who want to live a fuller life, and the two directions of the German and the Dutch direction, okay, the momentum of history. As I said, after several years, I became disillusioned with this, and I started to look for a practice that would be more philosophical, more in connection with the philosophical tradition, with the wisdom of the past, and would create new ways of interactions, not just a copy of psychology, not just, okay, we'll meet once a week and talk for an hour about your problems and I'll help you address them, but something new, something that comes from philosophy, not from psychology. And I worked for several years in self-reflection groups, and then, as I said, in the past few years, in contemplative groups. But I have to say that I am not the only one in this direction. There are some other wonderful people who don't work in my way, who work in different ways, but also work try to make philosophy, first of all, a dialogue with the past to enrich the individual. Self-reflection. I look for meaning in my life. I have no problem to solve. I wouldn't go to a psychologist. I look for meaning. People go to their guru. People go to night classes. They travel. They look for something meaningful in their life. In our time, there are so many people who feel that something is missing in their life. These are the people that I want to address. And these are the people that I, in my deep philosophy, but also other wonderful people in their own way, which is not my way, address it. So this is the third direction. I would say this is the third direction, okay? And this is where I am. I will mention one, for example, is José Barrientos, Professor José Barrientos from Spain, who is very influential in the Latin American world. You know, we are friends, but his way is not my way, and yet we are both in this third camp, that we see philosophy as enriching and in dialogue with the past, rather than as using logic or open conversation with counselees. So this is more or less the landscape as I see it, and I would like to stop at this point and just sort of bring it together then. Philosophical practice is that the important thing to remember, it's not an organized activity, but it's a very good idea to look at what others did, because although there are also superficial work, there's also very deep work. There are wonderful people just as there, and you have to learn what's going on. There are creative, wonderful people that are open and you can communicate with them. Just as there are those, some university and I don't know what that decided to open, they don't know what they're talking about. You have to learn. You have to learn. And the second thing is that where we are now, our directions are the result of a certain historical development. They are not from God. They are not logic. That's the way things developed, which doesn't mean that you in India should do the same thing. You have to explore your own ways and maybe something coming from your tradition without using it as a dogma, but using it as a food for development. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Your views, for your point of view and perspective on something. Generally, I like to summarize the views of the speakers, but since I know that you have to leave early, and I would wish that our participants, those who are now full with questions for you, first I'll take up only two questions from.
May I ask one question, Shivani ji?
Just a second, Alok ji. First, we'll give chance.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be coming very soon. So we have one question for you from YouTube. It is said that this is by Simi V. How can a psychological counselor be helped by the knowledge of philosophical counseling? Would you like to address Professor Rand to this question? Do you want questions in one go, or you will answer first and then we'll take up another question? Professor Rand? Am I audible to you, Professor Ran? Kindly unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Would you like to take all the questions at one go or one by one?
I prefer one by one
Okay.
because otherwise I will not remember.
This is the question.
I will answer shortly to enable many people to answer. So I think that this is a wonderful question. And in fact, there are philosophical counselors who are psychologists, who are actually psychologists, or that are accredited in some psychological counseling or psychological therapy. And they were impressed by the philosophical side. Maybe they themselves have a philosophical background. And they thought, oh, I want to enrich my psychological therapy with a philosophical perspective. I think that that's a wonderful idea, and there are people like this. Now, this is interesting in one important respect. Those of you, of the audience, who will decide to do philosophical counseling in India will encounter a legal issue, a serious legal issue. And this is in many countries in the world, as far as I know from my Indian friends in my group, also in India. You are not allowed to give, at least for money in a professional way, counseling if you don't have accreditation from a list of professions. And of course, psychology is there, philosophical counseling is not there. So if you're a philosophical counselor and you don't have an accreditation of psychology or some other of the allowed professions, you are breaking the law and you can be in prison for this. And this is in many countries. Okay. If you're already a psychologist, that's a wonderful way to do philosophical counseling, because you can say, hey, I'm a psychologist. If you're not, you're in trouble. That is another reason why it's a good idea for philosophical counselor or practitioners in India to think not about solving problems, not about addressing people with problems, but about a more educational, a more spiritual, more enriching attitude. Because then you don't need an accreditation. You don't need a certificate from anybody. But the short answer to the question is yes, it's a good idea, and people actually combine philosophy and psychology in their work.
As you did in your career.
Exactly, as I do, yeah.
Yeah. So another question for you by Biswajit Panigrahi, and I believe that the question is just the same that you said, that India as a tradition has a lot to give towards this direction. How different is philosophical counseling from the Guru Shishya Parampara, that is the Guru Shishya, the student and teacher relationship that we have in Upanishadic systems of practice by addressing the students' practical problems in life? What is so new about philosophical counseling as a concept?
Yeah. First of all, I should say that I have an amateurish knowledge of Indian philosophy and tradition, which means that don't take what I'm saying as an authority. Okay, my main field is Western philosophy. But there is a crucial distinction, a very important distinction between traditional wisdom schools, which happen not only in India, but also in China and in the West. In the West, as I said, the ancient world for hundreds of years had opened. This is not a relationship of guru to a student. It's not a relationship of a doctrine to a student. It's not a relationship to somebody who knows the truth. It's not a relationship to somebody who is closer to the answer.
You're right.
It's the philosophical counselor and the philosophical practitioner in general is a companion, a tour guide, you can say. Someone who can help you, who has been in those lands before, and so has the skills to show you the way, but your way is always yours, and you are the one who have to do it. Nobody will give you the truth. Nobody will connect you to God. You're the only one. That is why, for example, Stoic philosophy in the West, that had an entire worldview that used to help individuals, is not for us, because we don't want to have teachers who are incarnation of truth. You individual, this is a very modern idea, the idea of the individual who has his own, her own rights, her own life, her own wisdom, and is not just subsumed under some general approach, or a guru, or a teacher, or a dogma, or a religion. This is a modern view. This is really, it emerged in the West in the 17th, 18th century. It's a new idea. So we cannot take all those things and just adopt them. We have to see what is correct for our time.
Okay. So we have Dr. Alok Tandon. He was here. He wanted to ask a question.
Yeah.
Dr. Alok.
Okay, thanks, Shivani.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor, for taking a very, very realistic view of philosophical counseling, the confusions and the approaches behind that. I was willing to ask you, what is the subset of philosophical questions which philosophical counseling deals with in comparison to general philosophy? Wait.
I'm sorry, I missed a word. Can you repeat your question, please?
Yeah, I am repeating. When you say that philosophical counseling is a subset of philosophical practice, then the question comes, what are the specific questions which philosophical counseling deals? Because you are very much clear about it is not self-development, it is not, you can say, religious or spiritual or anything like that. But in the end of your presentation, you talked about the meaning of life question. Now, there is an answer to my question in this, but I would like you to elaborate upon how meaning of life questions are dealt with in philosophical counseling.
Yeah.
This is
so
my
again,
one question. And the second question is...
Alok ji, just one question at a time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so really it's a big question, an important question, and in my approach, the third approach that I described, it's a very important question. And maybe in the future I'll talk to you, I'll have another presentation or some other context and I will describe it in detail. But if I have to do it quickly, I would say, of course, in the logical thinking approach, it's something that logically, you analyze your problem and so on. And for me, that's not a real way to get into meaning. In the first approach, it's by open conversation. In my approach, the way to find your own path in a meaningful life or a deep life or a rich life, because that's the problem, that your own way is to be in connection with other seekers. I, as a facilitator, am also a seeker, and other group members, or it can be individual or group, and to explore together the different voices of the past as seeds from which we develop my own voice in life. Because the problem is that people are stuck in a very narrow and shallow perception of life. They don't even have a theoretical perception. They just automatically behave to life in a certain way. And this is the metaphor of stepping out of Plato's cave, which is the title of my main book about counseling. The goal in counseling, from my perspective, is to help the counselee step out of the cave of Plato. The cave in Plato's allegory is you just see shadows, you're stuck in this narrow world. So the path in my counseling is, first of all, to look at your life and realize the narrow cave in which you're imprisoned. And it's mostly not theoretical ideas. It's your automatic reactions, your choices, your emotions. There is a pattern that you approach life in a very narrow way. And then in a dialogue with other wisdom sources to find your own way, your own voice to step out of the cave in your own way. Okay, this is explained in detail with many case studies in my book, Stepping Out of Plato's Cave. Okay, but my paradigm is, you want to enrich your life, you want to find meaning. First of all, notice that you're in a cave, and then look for your own way out with the help of other past voices.
Right. Thank you. We have.
But how is it different from critical thinking? May I add?
No counter questions. There are others who wish to ask him some queries, yeah? Maybe if time permits, then we'll take your question, right? Dr. Rajesh Chaurasia from Varanasi, BHU. Rajesh ji, are you there? Rajesh ji? All right. He is there again. All right. He has some mic issue. I'll just present his question. The line between the psychology and philosophy is the concept of mind itself. I believe that in philosophy, the concept of mind is broader than psychology. What do you think?
Yes, it's an interesting idea. First of all, I should say that the line is not clear, and especially if you want to deal with philosophical problems, like in the first two approaches, then you have to decide where is the line. And let me also say that at the beginning of philosophical practice in the 1980s and 90s, I remember there were ongoing discussions about what is the boundary between psychology and philosophy, of course, which was a result of the fact that philosophers decides to deal with personal problems, which just put them in the camp of psychology. So they had to, and there was a lot of discussion. Many of them caricaturized psychology, and I think were just misled. It's an interesting proposal that the mind is broader than, that the conception of the mind is broader in philosophy than in psychology. For me, I would resonate with what you're saying. I would just put it in I would add something to what you're saying, and I would say psychology, to the extent that it's possible to summarize this rich field. You know, only in the United States there are more than 600 different psychotherapies registered legally. So that's mind-boggling. But to the extent that it's possible to summarize all of them, I think we are talking about psychology as long as we are talking about patterns and mechanisms in the mind, tendencies to behave, what causes what, you know, anxiety, so and so. And of course, different psychologies have different understanding about how the mind works. The mind is like a certain mechanism. Now, I feel uncomfortable saying it because if you look at humanistic, existentialist psychology, it's not exactly like this. But the idea that the mind works somehow, it's a working machine somehow, in some way. If you allow me to generalize, to overgeneralize. In philosophy, I will go with what you're saying. In philosophy, the mind, there are dimensions of thinking, of understanding that are beyond mechanisms, beyond patterns of thinking. And for me, in my approach, and I think from other people in my third approach, in philosophical practice, we use our capacities to go beyond patterns of thinking, to go beyond the mechanism, to find another dimension of understanding that is not just psychological mechanism. Which means that the psychologist has to normalize the person, has to find the right way to put the mind into work. Our goal is very different, is to find that dimension of the mind that is beyond those patterns, beyond the mechanism, that is open to new dimensions. And this is why in philosophy, in my approach, that we use deep thinking, not from here, but from here. You know, our exercises in my group, we have small groups of 6 people, 8 people, and so on, online very often. And when we can also, we do retreats, not in pandemic time, but we often do exercises for thinking. Exercises like repeating, like mantra, the same sentence from the text again and again. Or speak only in poetic, concentrated way, and so on. The idea is to break the patterns, the normal patterns of thinking, and to think in a fresh new way about myself, about the text, about the relationship between us. So here I would go with what you say. Yes, it's a different dimension of the mind that is beyond the psychological structure. That is the way I see it.
Right. Thank you. We have another question by Kumar Neeraj Sachdev from BITS Pilani. Neeraj ji, are you there?
Yes, yes, Shivani ji, thank you. I had mentioned that in the chat box also that we talk about know thyself. This is something common to Western tradition and Indian tradition. I am just wondering how we can use this fundamental idea in philosophical counseling.
Yeah, that's a good question, an important question. Yeah. And in fact, as I mentioned several formats, you know, philo café, Socratic dialogue, counseling, and I mentioned that there are groups of self-reflection. That's exactly their goal, to understand ourselves. Now, let me just start by saying that in many, you know, if you just ask the person, what do you think about yourself, or look at yourself, they don't have the tools to do it. Just think about it. If you ask a person, go to the street and ask somebody, what is love? What is true love? They cannot say much. They'll say maybe something that they heard in the movie yesterday. You know, you have to have the tools to really understand our human world in a deep way. And for this reason, the crucial for me is not logical thinking. Logical thinking will not lead me anywhere. The crucial point is dialogue with past wisdom traditions. I don't accept any wisdom tradition as my authority. I don't follow any guru. That would be just to lock myself in another cave. But I have to be in dialogue with, oh, here's this idea, and here is that idea, and here is this idea. Now I have the tools to develop self-understanding. So this requires the counselor or the facilitator of the group to be very careful about creating a dialogue between the person and other ideas of philosophers without presenting them as authorities. This is not authority. This is just a voice, just a raw material, and now you have to work on it in your own way. Okay, so here the goal of the philosophical counselor, of the one who does self-reflection groups, is to create the dialogue, the open dialogue. It's very important, not follow as an authority, the open dialogue between you, the counselee, or the group member, and those many voices sometimes. For example, it's important to offer at least 2 or 3 different views. Because otherwise, if you present only one, he is the right. I very often in my counseling, and the past few years I don't do counseling, I do only groups. But very often, you know, you present some idea by, let's say, Jean-Paul Sartre. I say, oh yes, I'm exactly like this. Come on, wait a minute. Let's see another voice, and then you see that things are more complicated. You learn to think about yourself. You have to learn. It doesn't come automatically. Normal people in the street don't know how to think philosophically about themselves. You have to give them the tools. And for me, the tools is a dialogue with many voices of the past, relevant voices of the past.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. May we have now Lalit Saraswat from IIT Kanpur. He had a question. Lalit?
Yes. Yes. Professor Shivani, am I audible there?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Professor, for this interesting talk. And my point is actually starting from your last perspective, which you said that probably going beyond the pattern and probably breaking the pattern and regularities. So my point is to get some more insight, at least to know this point. How can we be assured about that a position that we are not, doing a bad philosophy or over philosophizing or doing, that kind of question which comes in the medical sciences, psychiatry and psychology and psychotherapies, that first do no harm. And first do no harm, right? So in that way, if we actually, as a philosopher, because as you said that we have to go for either a logic-based therapy or illogical kind of possibility of inconsistencies can seep into such kind of therapeutic aspects. So if we say that, how to understand carefully that we are not being a clock and not at all acting like a cloud also. So how this cloudy clock kind of situation in terms of counseling can be of greater help for counselor as well as counseling. So we are not over philosophizing. We are not over basically we are not doing even the pseudo philosophy also, because I don't know whether this word exists or not, but I think in the Wittgensteinian perspective we have certain positions where pseudo philosophy is also discussed by certain philosophers. So that is one hitch which is there in my mind.
I think that this is also, all the questions so far were wonderful questions, and this is a very important question too. How do we know that we are not doing any harm, or we are just going in a wrong direction, or imposing some idea on the counselee? So first of all, let me say that's a special problem if you're trying to address personal problems. I mean, you don't have any background for this. If you have only a philosophy background, you studied Plato and Nietzsche and Sartre and so on. How do you pretend to be able to talk to an individual about their specific personal? It's like someone who learned Nietzsche and Plato and so on and goes with his logic, his great logic, to solve. To help the car mechanic, to solve the problem with the car. I mean, it's quite absurd. So first of all, I will say the issue that you're raising is an important issue, especially if we are dealing with personal problems. Now, let me add a personal anecdote. I think it will help here. My ex-wife was a psychoanalyst, and she witnessed with me the entrance into the field of philosophical counseling. We married a little bit after my entrance to the field of philosophical counseling, and I learned a lot from her. So much. Although I have a master's in psychology, she was already a psychoanalyst, a much more experienced person. I learned a lot, and I realized how much the ordinary philosopher is not equipped to deal with personal problems. You may know logic, you don't know anything professional about how people actually work. For example, one important thing is how to listen to the counselee, how to bring things together in a way that a philosopher doesn't know. I want to be concrete and to tell you, we philosophers, I'm now speaking from my philosophical side, not my psychological side. We philosophers listen to what the person says. But we don't listen, as a psychologist, as any good psychologist does, to why did he say it now and not a minute ago? Why is he using this metaphor and not that metaphor? Why did he react in this way and not that way? An ordinary philosopher knows zero about this, more than just every person in the street. Is not. So the result is that the philosopher comes with his ideas or her ideas, and as the questionnaire here said, just imposes their ideas without seeing that life, the fullness of life, is different. Okay? Perhaps I'll give you a specific example. Perhaps this will this will be. I had a counselee during those years who came to me because of issues, and at that time I was still dealing with personal problems. Didn't manage to create personal relations, especially with women. Okay, so he wanted to talk about that. That was his problem. He couldn't create romantic or personal relations with women. And so we talked. And after the first session, I usually sit down and summarize everything because this is your way of consolidating what happened. And I realized after the first session, what happened? I cannot summarize. What did we say? It was so fluid. Well, I said to myself, maybe that happens sometimes. After the second session, the same thing happens. Somehow I cannot understand what's going on. There is no line, no specific thing. And I talked to my ex-wife and I says, you know, I want to share with you because we sometimes shared insights. And she says, well, listen to how he avoids giving you any information, how he avoids giving you any ability to summarize anything. And in the third session, in the next session, I listened in the right way. And I noticed every time I ask a question, he runs away to another question. He said, yeah, and then, by the way, it reminds me that so-and-so, okay? And once you see this, and a psychologist can see it immediately, but me as a beginning philosophical counselor, who was not fully equipped at that time, I didn't realize it. And that is his pattern. His pattern was running away as if not to be put in a box. Okay. And as we continued talking, we saw that this is a general pattern in his life. That I will never be caught. Okay, I'm not this, I'm not this. Yes, but let me tell you a story. Oh, this reminds me a joke, and so on. And now we can understand a pattern. And now, you know, in my capacity now, at the end of the first session, I can already guess where we will go. But at that time, it took me 3 sessions to start to see a general pattern. This is a way of understanding the world, not in his thoughts, but in his behavior and emotions. It was all his life said, not his mind, his life. His psychology said, everybody is trying to capture me in a box and I will not be visible. So life is about finding my way out because the other person always tries to put you in a box. It's a certain conception of relationships. And of course, once you understand this, it's quite clear how he didn't manage to create personal relations. Because if you talk he told me about some of his conversations with people he dated, with women he dated. You know, the woman doesn't know what's going on. You know, she says something, and at the moment she says it seems that he likes her. The other moment he seems that he's elsewhere. With such a pattern, such a conception of people are trying to put you in your box, and what is important in life is to always run away, to be invisible. It's very hard to create any emotion and any emotional relation with somebody. So this is an example of how psychological capacities are very important in order to understand a pattern. And a pattern doesn't come from some theory. You don't theorize about the counselee and you come, oh, I have a good theory by Plato, and you fit exactly into Plato. That's silly. That's silly. But rather you listen to the theory, and he has a theory. It's a theory of this guy. He has a theory about what the other person is. The other person is the look. It's a little bit similar to Jean-Paul Sartre, you know, the great philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre of the 20th century, the French philosopher. For him, the other person is a look that tries to objectify me. Right? For him, if you remember the passage on the look, you go into a park and you sit and you see that the person is looking at you. At that moment, you feel that you're object to him. And to some extent, it's not exactly the same. Nobody is exactly the same. Everybody is special and unique. But to some extent, it reminds us the theory of Sartre about the other person. The other person is a look that objectifies me. Once you understand this, you work for several sessions to see how everyday life, it's important. Don't talk theory. Everyday life is connected to this pattern, to this conception of...
It's debatable. Yet, if you have to place your approach under this distinction, which one will you choose and why?
That's another good question. There is indeed a rough distinction, like all important distinctions, not clear cut, but there is between analytic philosophy, which is more poetic, more literary, looks at life, and the Anglo-American philosophy that is more analytic and more logical, contemporary, we're talking. So first of all, you can see that the second approach that you mentioned, the Dutch approach, that starts from Holland, is a very analytic kind of, it's a very Anglo-American approach, right? For them, the philosopher, if I want to be a little bit nasty, and you know, my philosophical education was 1 foot in analytic and 1 foot in continental philosophy. So I'm not against any of them. But if I want to be a little bit nasty to the Anglo-American philosophy, it's like a cowboy. Comes into town, shoots the bad guy, and wins. It's like in a cowboy movie. The same thing about Anglo-American philosophy. They solve problems, okay? They analyze it and they have a solution. So this is the approach of the Dutch, so to speak, the logical approach, the second general approach of philosophical practice. By the way, this is my division. There are many, as I said, there is no general division. I am classifying them to 3 groups, to the more logical, the more conversation, and the more enrichment direction.
Right.
So that's clear about them. The second approach, which is, first, if you want, the German approach, a kind of open, it's a little bit more continental, but frankly, I don't see much philosophy there anyway. If you just converse with somebody, I don't see much philosophy there. My approach is not blind to Anglo-American philosophy, but it's certainly connected much more to continental philosophy. Because for me, life is complex, is rich, is poetic. To try to summarize life in some logical argument seemed to me silly, simply silly. There are aspects of life that are where logic plays a role. Logic is very important. I have a lot, some of my articles, my publications are very logical. But life is complex. If you want to really touch life, then come on, if you want to analyze either this or that, and this follows from this, you're not going to do much in life. You may be helping people. Maybe it helps them, but you're not going to touch something deep. I should mention here that there is an approach in psychology. In psychology, as I said, has hundreds of different approaches, but if you want to a common division is there is a kind of a group of psychotherapies that is called cognitive, the cognitive approach, cognitive behavioral, and so on. And this is an approach that uses logic.
Yeah.
This approach does not claim that it touches your deep self or anything like this. It just helps you to stop smoking. It just helps you to deal with your depression. And it's a very effective, relatively effective approach. So for me, this logical approach is already in philosophical counseling, is already a copy of cognitive psychology. So I have full respect to cognitive, if it helps people to stop smoking, if it helps people to overcome their depression and whatever, to deal with their boss, that's fine. I'm not saying that it's not a practical way of dealing with life. I'm just saying that in philosophy, we want depth. We want to touch your soul. We want you to live fully. Logic is not enough there. And if you are with me on this topic, then you have to be more connected to continental philosophy than analytic philosophy.
Right. Thank you. One quick question from Dr. Pankaj. Are you there?
Maybe this will be the last one, or one before the last, because I have
Or one before the last. One before the last.
Yeah, this is Pankaj. Hello.
Yes.
Are you listening?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you, Shivani. Give me a chance to ask. I have a 2 issue or observation. One is regarding the understanding or nature of philosophy. as you say, philosophical counseling rather, I just recall William James' statement that everyone has their own worldview or own philosophy. One thing is that everyone, those who are self-conscious being, have their own philosophy. Now the issue is that in the same way as you are saying that everyone can do philosophical counseling, the way he perceives or the way he understands, or the way he is having worldview. Now the issue is when we are going to, especially when we are going to practice something, automatically others comes. It is not my way of doing thing or the way I do, because it concern other. The thing what I point out, that when you are going to counsel somebody, there are a lot for at stake. Now the issue is, if we don't have, for instance, psychologists have their handbook, doctors have their handbook, there are procedures. But if in philosophy, those who are doing philosophy or not doing philosophy, they just counsel, there are so many, problem in that sense. It in fact disturbs me that how can we say that everyone is a philosopher or everyone is in a loose sense or ordinary sense, that's all right. But when we say that doing a philosophical counseling, at least there should be some procedure, there should be some, what we say, that protocol is there. So now when I am seeing different, philosopher counselor, then I thought that why this is the case. And second thing, which is more
one question, Pankaj, one question,
just a related issue. Second one is that, according to your approach, what is the relationship between belief and emotions?
Yeah.
While we are going to do philosophical counseling, that I think there is a problem with this belief and emotions. So, what is your response in that?
Yeah, I cannot answer all of this, and really, if you want to look at in depth at my approach, and I developed it for many years. Stepping Out of Plato's Cave is really a good place to start. It's on Amazon, both as an electronic book, and this is a good place. Or invite me another time, and I'll speak about specifically my approach.
Yes,
so I cannot, of course, go into that, and these are important questions. I'll say one thing about the second approach. When I talk about the worldview of the person, I am not talking about what they declare in words. For me, it doesn't matter. Those big declarations don't matter very much. After all, I can say, oh, I believe in equality, and then go home and beat my wife, right? I mean, what I declare is totally unrelated, is often totally unrelated. What matters for me is the worldview that is expressed in what you say, in how you behave, in your emotions, in your attitudes. Just as the example that I gave you about the guy who has a worldview where everybody tries to objectify you and the other person is, and the game of life is to be objectified or not objectified. This was not something he declared. So thought, emotions, attitudes, these are all expressions of a worldview. And I am not saying that since everybody has a certain worldview, that means that everybody can be a philosophical counselor. Of course not. To be a philosophical counselor, you have to have certain capacities. This comes to your first question. It may be a good idea to define clearly what is needed for a philosopher. What training does a philosophical counselor have to have? And different associations, different organizations have such definitions. But they only hold for this specific approach and this specific organization. So whether it's required, yeah, it would be a great thing. But at the moment, we don't have, we just have the definition of the IGPP, the German association, the definition of this SECAPVI, the Mexican association, the definitions of the 5 or 7 different associations in Italy.
All right. One last question by Dr. Pratibha from Miranda House, New Delhi. That's it. That would be the last. Dr. Pratibha, are you here?
Yeah, I am here. Thank you, Dr. Shivani, and thanks, Professor, for such a nice lecture. You partly answered my question in the previous answer. But my point is that in order to counsel others, if I want to become a philosophical counselor, I must be articulated and completely systematic in my thought. Do you think I need to possess Socratic wisdom in order to counsel others? So before counseling others, I need to counsel myself first. What do you say on this?
I agree on both things. First of all, you have to, as a counselor, you have to have a lot of knowledge and a systematic ability to know where you are in counseling. It's not just chatting with somebody. And one of the things that are necessary, you have to be counseled yourself. You have to experience how it is. I'll tell you of a common experience. You know, I not only counseled, I also gave training for counseling, according to my approach, of course. So I know I have quite a lot of experience in how people enter the field. And not everyone is good for counseling. But I'll tell you, the beginning philosophical counselor in every approach, not just my approach, you know, you sit in the session and you know, oh my God, he's going to answer me. What am I going to do next? You know, you feel like you don't know what you're doing. When you're a good philosophical counselor, you know where you are. You have a general landscape of what's going on between you and the counselee, where you might be going. You have tools. You have steps. You don't just shoot from the hip. You have steps. You know where you are. I can tell you from my approach, and I can do training from my approach. There are other people who do from their approach, but I completely agree with you. Counseling requires a lot of skill. Both skills, you just have to have a lot of experience. You're dealing with people, not with logic, with people. And to have a systematic understanding of what you're doing and where you're going. I agree.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for answering and taking up every question. Although I can't thank you enough, and I know that you are in hurry, you have to leave. So with a note of thank, we are humbled by your presence, by you have taken out time, besides that you were deeply engaged today with your other assignments, and even then you agreed to be here with us. We really are thankful. We're with a humble note. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Professor Shivani. I appreciate inviting me. It's a pleasure for me to talk in general about the things that are so close to my heart, but especially with people from India. I hope very much that you will find your own voice, looking at what has been done, but developing your own voice. And I have, you know, it's a great country of wisdom and huge tradition. I'm sure that you will just don't copy those. No, don't copy me. Don't copy anybody. Just listen carefully to what they say and develop your own. I am at your disposal. I would be delighted to speak more with you, to give you workshops or whatever. If you want to join my deep philosophy activity, I'm at your disposal. So all the best to everybody. And thank you
so much, Ran. Yeah, I wanted you to introduce to you our Professor R.C. Sinha, Chairman of Indian Council of Philosophical Research, New Delhi.
Namaskar.
Can you?
Good evening. Good evening.
Yeah.
Good morning too.
Hello.
He's
delighted you want to write to me. If you want, you will.
I listened very patiently and very carefully. Thank you very much. I must thank everyone.
Thank you very much for listening. Thank
And
you
hope
very
we
much
will
for
be
listening.
meeting again.
I would be happy to continue our relationship. As I tell you, India for me is a special place on earth.
Certainly, hopefully.
Bye bye, everybody.
we will be
Thank you,
having-
Professor
having you.
Shivani. And
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye. So we proceed on to our valedictory session, and let me introduce our participants to Dr. Sushim Dubey, now a program officer, but he has a long list of laurels to his credit. He has already taught he has taught philosophy in Rani Durgavati University in Yoga Center, and he is an MA and PhD in philosophy, a postdoctorate in yoga and meditation, and he has received 3 university medals and 3 national fellowships. And to his credit, 14 books, I mean, no less, 39 research papers, 10 radio talks, and also broadcasted a television program on Surya Namaskar. And he has been resource person of over 40 online courses. And recently he has received, his book has received Best Book Award, and the name of the book was Kautilya Arthashastra. So I now invite him in all humility, Professor Dr. Sushim Dubeji. Are you here?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking our time.
My very humble namaskar and pranam to all who are gathered here in this Google Meet, and very our live broadcasting, which has received a very overwhelming response in last our several programs. I do observe that it is going to be more than 5,000 views for today's program, as I do observe. So I welcome all of who are here with this live broadcasting, as well as few numbers here in Google Meet. So I begin with this program as a philosophical counseling, a very promising, new, and something which was required to be refreshing the areas of philosophy in our entire country. So in that way, this topic is very promising, and it is declared, or it is advertised as first online program, and with our honorable chairman, Professor Ramesh Chandra Sinhaji, under whose able leadership we are going forward. And this study circle program, which happens to be the small enough, has been made so vast that from few numbers, few decade numbers, or few 10 numbers to few thousands numbers, so it has exceeded 1,000% from philosophical interest, philosophy council interest around the country. So being part of this validation of this program, I must say this thing. Professor Shivani Sharma ji, who has also been the organizer of one of the biggest program of ICPR, for which ICPR also approached to the Guinness World Records for applying it, and it is under process, and all ICPR endeavors to it, and behind to Sri Piyush Parimoo ji and our entire galaxy of scholars. Of course, in this program, the professor which has just left us from foreign, Professor Agora, and of course, Professor Beena ji, who has also delivered his talk on philosophical counseling very nicely to earlier to me, and I very intently, contently, and interestingly listened to her, as well as our earlier professor, and also our honorable chairman, who delivered inaugural speech for this program. What required to be said for this very interesting topic, which is required, because for last a decade or more, or since 1995, and earlier to that, another 15 years back, the laurels of philosophy, depth of philosophy has shifted towards Sanskrit. If we go for 30 years back, and roots were there, and people got more textual their studies from Sanskrit. And 1995, when more yoga centers were established by University Grants Commission in almost 15 places, people did find that it's more interesting. And peak example, if I am allowed to say, is the Mumbai University, where the philosophy department more thrived on the yoga. Because, and why? It gives health aspects, it gives mental aspects, it gives fulfillment on several other ways, on practical aspects, where our traditional or on a rutted track study of philosophy has lost its shine. So this philosophical counseling is going to be again another milestone, and will put forward attraction in the field of philosophy. But having said so, and in comparison to the lecture which has held just by now, there is a very interesting questions also held, and Dr. Pankaj Srivastava also posed another also I was observing important on objectivity. This was questioned before the Dr. Beena Isaac also. How do we can have an objectivity for philosophical counseling? And so much and so have talked, and so many times it has been discussed about example of cave where our earlier Professor Agura wanted to make us out. And if I not to compare, it was more or less about the Jaina philosophy, which doesn't accept any mode of knowledge, and that way a position has been if allowed for critical thinking, and in a long tradition for discussing and debating on such a mode of where we do not accept and where we try to define something. So it is very difficult and hard for others to accept the views of the person who is advocating the same thing. So let me come back to the objectivity, and also in our Indian tradition, particularly for which I was asked to talk about, we have the word mantrana, mantra, mantri, council of ministers, atma mantrayate. These are the words which occurred in the Upanishads and other, even in Panchatantra and Hitopadesh. I wanted to show actually there are several these words which were there, and there is a word of vivek, discretion. How one come about the counseling for, there was also the question, and it was also raised in discussion somewhere, ki one has to counsel first for himself, then for others also. What is the model of knowledge? How the counseling occurs, by in which way? From here onwards, we can talk about the methodology of the counseling, where one get the faculty of or ability of counseling, which way it can be developed. These are the frameworks for discussion of whenever we are talking in general about the counseling, and philosophy itself is a lover of mankind. Automatically, it is well saying in India कि यहाँ तो आप सलाह मांगे तो it is free of cost. Everybody is ready to give. So this philosophical counseling, as I took many words like mantrayate, mantrana, mantra. This is what has been there in Vedic tradition. This is how the counseling is old enough. And atma, swadhyaya, swagyan, swast, these all words are related with all a kind of a way of counseling on various aspects of knowing, willing, feeling, realizing. And one more very important thing, let us have the word of action, which is revolving on this counseling, existence and activity and all those things. This 6 letters or 6 alphabets words, action, revolves, rest, and all, it is in 10 directions, 6 weathers, and 4 dimensions, X, Y, Z, and time, where all these activities and 4 level of consciousness, this is all the word is action is there. And in all spheres of life, if I am also allowed to leaving the example of this cave which was given so many times, let us come back to the another kind of understanding of the knowledge and activity in all our action in life. Let us have an example of pyramid, because it has from all round blocks, and from which these blocks we go upward, putting forward or putting another blocks on it. This is how the knowledge occurs. And on the fundamental of the base of these blocks, they are connected or they are concerned with the right, our interactions with the worldly affairs, our sense organs. They are how we gain the knowledge. And upper blocks denotes to those situations where we try to correlate the things, and upper more and more, it is more abstract. That is what the Plato put on the above label, sahas, nyaya, sadgun, sanyam, justice, and on to the top it was the good. That is what has been taken in the earlier speaker, that we are all endeavoring to do whole ethics and morality. These theories rest upon those and deciding on the righteous and what should be the proper action. So I am giving the example rather more to consider about the pyramid, because whenever we are talking about the counseling, one person is coming or seeking advice or seeking his solution for his adversity or any problems in which he is or he can be or he is suffering of, because there are so many suffering. If Buddha has to be also called the greatest counselor in the history of mankind. He brought he came for just elevating the suffering of mankind. This is what has been declared. So an example of the pyramid, a lower pyramid is always come under the larger pyramid, and a larger pyramid can further be in the further larger pyramid. So a counselor can always be on the blocks if we are to see that if he or she must have the larger experience or larger knowledge base block than the person who has come for seeking the counseling. Therefore, thereby he has the peak of or depth of the knowledge, and therefore thereby he can analyze and understand the problems of others, because he will see the on what basic ground or what basic blocks of knowledge a person is there, and what he is lacking the knowledge or basic experience of the life, for which he can further add the more blocks of knowledge, or he can analyze the situation of a further from those blocks which are lacking in his experience. So therefore thereby the knowledge blocks as vast or as vastest it can be, by there or by then a person can be a counselor for the lower pyramidical knowledge or low experience of that person. That is what. And let us again come back to the phenomenon that guru tradition or guru, that word has occurred in earlier speaker also. What is the guru? That is not a teacher, that is not a counselor, he is a guru. Guru is what? Who is the gambhir, who is the rather more heavier in terms of energy level. That has been in all our mantra in Upanishad. It starts from the Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sah Viryam Karvavahi. This is what is the enhancing the consciousness, and this is the consciousness where all kinds of knowledge, all kinds of suffering, all kinds of reflections, all kinds of experience and realization occurs. And this is what is the supreme consciousness, where from itself flows the counseling. Unless a person realizes, if a very vast or very a person who has the largest or is a enlightened person, that we say he has vastest consciousness, just by seeing the face itself, it pain and what he has eaten and what discussions and is going on his mind, it is in his own life. This is what is required for a counselor. Vastest experience of the life itself person, to tell about the relation and revelation. Having said so, because time has gone for more what I was to speak for the time, even then, having said so, let me come back to the objectivity for which we It is itself enlightening. That is the word is coming from. So we will continue this our journey of this counseling, and this counseling word maybe started from 1980 from West, and this this way a separate from desired result is achieved. This is what the Siddhi. Siddhi is not something superior something, but it might be superior while going or growing. This is what. So mantra is manan. And this manan is the self-counseling, whether it is acquired within oneself or it is taken by from the outside. Either it could be the counselor, or it could be the guru, or it could be the teacher, or it could be the person having the larger base block of knowledge and higher the peak of the pyramid of the knowledge or experience. So having said so, I would like to, because thank all who are here and also giving the opportunity for speaking, and I am very thankful to our honorable chairman, Professor Shivani Sharma ji, for arranging, and of course Piyush ji, who is very well behind and wanted to do a lot of this in such kind of activity, and also told me to speak on Indian tradition. So thank you all. Thank you once again. My humble pranam to all and all those who are connected with this program.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sushimji. Wonderful, such an energetic valedictory. I think you leave no space for hunger, physical hunger, but yes, you remind us of our dinner. So that is one point we do agree. And I assure you that we are not leaving without the message that you are wishing to and trying to say again and again in your talk about the pyramid. I hope that we understand, we get to know this concept, because there was a hurry and there is lack of time. So I hope that we get another chance whereby you can explore this concept of pyramid more elaborately with our participants, with us, so that the underpinnings of this concept is clear and explicit for others to understand. With this, Professor Sinha, do you?
Thank you all. Thank you.
No, thank you, sir. Thank you for sitting for such a long time. Thank you for being there throughout the event. We are really thankful to you. It's not easy. We understand that you do keep busy yourself all the day. You keep attending all the webinars. It's not easy for you to take out time, but thank you so much. And I also wish to thank the ICPR and the officers of ICPR. I also wish to thank Professor Beena Isaac. I also thank Professor Ran Lahav, who joined and had to leave for an appointment. I also wish to thank all the participants, my colleagues, my friends, and of course, last but not the least, Piyush Parimoo. I cannot skip him, his mind. I cannot skip Piyush out of my mind, because he is the spine behind these programs. He is the encouraging spirit who keeps motivating me to organize it. I honestly thank. He is the man behind the scene, but he is one who motivates us to conduct such programs with such an enthusiasm and such an energy. And I am also thankful to the staff of Department of Philosophy, my students who have been my strength, who always come up, who always are there as and when are demanded by the Department of Philosophy. I'm thankful to my personal friends, colleagues, and everyone. Thank you so much for being there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Sushimji.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Beena. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Bharatji.
Thank you.